Mr. Chairman, are you ready to begin?
Yes, I am.
Please provide a 5-second countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. And before we proceed, I'd like to go over some items for our members participating remotely. First, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to use the video function for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members participating remotely will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during an in-person hearing. This is out of courtesy to all members on the committee and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for a couple of seconds before speaking so that we will be able to hear everything that you are saying. In order to ensure everything members say is captured on the live stream of this hearing, I ask that members pause 2 or 3 seconds before beginning to speak. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransAffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Please keep in mind that you will need to refresh the repository page as it does not automatically update. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Yes? Is there somebody? Okay. Does any member have a question? Does any member in the room or on who's participating remotely have a question about the conduct of this hearing with members participating remotely? Okay, I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. I would like to start by thanking the advocates who helped get 3 more pieces of legislation that will impact veterans to the President's desk this week. It was the focused effort by all that one of these bills, H.R. 3504, the Ryan Kuehls and Paul Benny Specially Adaptive Housing Improvement Act of 2019 passed. This effort shows the power of advocacy. I want to thank the members of this committee who fought for its passage, specifically Dr. Rowe. Your leadership was essential in making this bill a law. While banding our voices together to get legislation across the finish line and enacted into law is important, it is equally important to hear your opinion on bills that are at the starting line. Getting your feedback is critical for getting legislation right. So thank you to all the witnesses who will testify today and to the organizations that submitted statements for the record. Your voices are a valued part of this committee's legislative responsibility. The legislation on the agenda for this hearing cover a range of veterans issues from improving dental care to inclusion of certain members of the National Guard to be interred in state veterans cemeteries. Many of the bills we will discuss today focus on improving benefits to women and minority veterans. Every effort must be made to make the VA of the future inclusive and inviting to everyone who serves. This starts with addressing VA's motto. to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan. Lincoln's words cannot be dismissed. They were part of one of the most powerful and meaningful addresses ever provided by a U.S. president. That sentence framed not only Lincoln's commitment to care for veterans and their families, but it set in motion a national commitment to do the same. And as the motto, these words offer not only the department's mission statement, but it acts as an invitation to those who served to come to VA. It is time to make that mission statement and invitation inclusive to everyone who has served, who is serving now, and who will serve in the future. It is because of our reverence for President Lincoln that it has taken this long to truly discuss this change. And one of the things that made Lincoln exceptional as a president was his willingness to evolve his own thinking and to fight the status quo to make the United States a better place for all of its citizens. I think if he were here today, he would support changing the motto to honor and invite all who have borne the battle. I look forward to having a thoughtful discussion on this bill. VA's advisory committees are essential in providing advice and feedback to the Secretary, and every effort should be made to elevate the voices of groups that are not often heard. And that is why I'm glad to see a bill on the agenda that will establish a VA Tribal Advisory Committee, so the unique concerns and needs of our Native veterans are not overlooked. In the same vein, the Secretary should hear from our LGBTQ community as well, and that is why I am supportive of the legislation that will provide them a seat at VA's Minority Advisory Committee. I'm also glad to see H.R. 4526, the Bryan Talley VA Employment Transparency Act, included on today's agenda. Bryan has been a tireless advocate for veterans who sought care through VA and were subsequently harmed through negligence. I agree with Bryan. If a veteran receives care through VA or through community care, and the negligent actions of a provider result in harm, the veteran needs to be made fully aware of who caused the harm and what legal remedies are available so they can be made whole. Finally, my draft legislation to amend Title 38 United States Code to extend certain employment and reemployment rights to members of the National Guard who perform state active duty would protect service members from being forced into arbitration when they seek to enforce the rights granted to them under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, or the SCRA, and the Uniform Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, otherwise known as USERRA. USERRA was created in 1994 to protect service members' employment status, and this legislation would prevent employers from circumventing those protections. I would like to speak to each of these bills on today's agenda, but in deference to everyone's time, I will stop here. I look forward to a broad and meaningful debate today, and I now recognize Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes for his opening remarks.
Thank you,
Dr.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And with 20 bills and covering a wide range of topics before us today this morning, we clearly have a very full agenda. I support many of the bills that we'll be discussing today, but we'll keep my opening statement limited to only a few of them in the interest of time. One of those bills is H.R. 7111, the Veterans Economic Recovery Act. I was proud to introduce this bill last month with Congressman Levin, Chairman Levin, as well as with Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Tester in the Senate. No one, including our veterans, is immune to the devastation that COVID-19 pandemic has wrought on the American economy. Before the novel coronavirus led to stay-at-home orders that shuttered businesses across the country, the veteran unemployment rate had reached its lowest levels in modern history under this president at just 3%. It is now 8.8%, which is 2.3% better than the overall non-veteran unemployment rate, but still 5.2% higher than it was just 5 months ago. For veteran women, specifically, the unemployment rate is 9.6%, which is 4.5% better than the overall unemployment rate for women, but 5.9% higher than it was just several months ago. A recent study by the Brookings Institute found that a significant portion of jobs that have been lost during the pandemic will never come back. Another recent study by the Bob Woodruff Foundation found that a significant number of veterans are, or at least were, employed in the industry that are most likely to be impacted by those job losses. Those of us lucky enough to serve on this committee know better than most the skills and intellect that our veterans leave the military with and just how valuable they are to the workforce as civilians. Equipping them to thrive in the new economy should be one of Congress's highest priorities when discussing pandemic recovery and response efforts, which is why I introduced this bill. The Veterans Economic Recovery Act would authorize a rapid retraining program so that veterans who have lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic can access short-term training programs and in-demand fields to help them quickly find new jobs. The rapid retraining program this bill would create is based on two successful similar programs that were established in the Vow to Hire Veterans Heroes Act of 2011 and the Forever GI Bill of 2017. The Veterans Economic Recovery Act is a bipartisan, bicameral bill that is supported by many veteran service organizations and has been proposed for inclusion in the next COVID relief package. I believe that it would go far in helping veterans suffering from job losses due to COVID-19 to get back on their feet, support themselves, their families, and help our country heal. I hope that they will be signed into law very soon. Two other bills that I support on today's agenda are H.R. 7287, a bill introduced by Congressman Bost to expand license portability to certain non-physician health care professionals that complete disability exams, and a draft bill sponsored by Congressman Barr to require the Department of Veterans Affairs to reinstate disability benefits questionnaires on the department's public website. Congressman Bost's bill would expand the list of contract examiners that can conduct disability claims across state lines, including via telehealth, which is particularly timely given that many veterans are unable or uncomfortable with the attending in-person disability exams during the pandemic. Congressman Barr's bill would allow a veteran's private provider to access the same DBQ that the VA or contract examiner would use so that the private provider can provide a disability exam on their veteran patient and collect all the information VA needs to adjudicate that veteran's claim. As an OBGYN physician who managed my own private practice for years, I believe a provider that has developed a relationship with a veteran patient over several years is a critical resource and should not be denied the opportunity to access the patient's disability in the same format as a VA examiner would. I thank Congressman Bost and Congressman Barr for their leadership on these issues. One bill on our agenda that I still have many questions about is H.R. 6039, which would require the transfer of historical Mar Island Naval Cemetery to the city of Vallejo, California, and to VA. The United States Navy transferred ownership of the entire Mar Island Naval Shipyard at no cost to the city in 1996 to promote local financial growth. However, the city subsequently allowed the cemetery, which includes the remains of 3 Medal of Honor recipients, and Anna Arnold Key Turner, the daughter of Francis Scott Key, to fall into disrepair, and insisted it did not have sufficient resources to properly maintain it. I was shocked and saddened when I first saw the photos of the abysmal conditions of the veterans' graves at Mar Island Cemetery, and would like to convey my disappointment and frustration that the city of Vallejo had shirked its solemn duty to properly care for those interned there. I question the city's claim that it cannot generate sufficient tax revenue to care for the cemetery, given the sale of a municipal golf course and the tax revenue generated by homes located on the island. And will also note that those homes currently on the market are listed, all listed for well above $500,000. I appreciate the Department of Defense recent efforts to restore the cemetery through its Innovative Readiness Training IRT grant. My understanding is that the IRT team has realigned toppled headstones, removed overgrown trees, fixed drainage damage caused by the neighboring golf course, and completed other needed repairs through the IRT team told my staff that the city will have to occasionally mow the grass and raise or realign the headstones. I want to thank the Undersecretary of Memorial Affairs, Mr. Reeves, for his commitment to replacing any damaged headstones for veterans and their family members under the VA's existing authority if the city asked the VA to do so. Given the extensive work the IRT team accomplished at the VA's promise, and the VA's promise, I'm unsure whether this legislation is necessary to ensure that individuals buried in the cemetery receive the dignified final resting place they deserve. I'm also very concerned that this bill would set a precedent that the federal government is responsible for bailing out local governments that can't prioritize the resources to maintain, of all things, a veteran cemetery. That said, I know that Congressman Mike Thompson, and Mike and I talked on the phone the other day about this, wants to do right by his constituents. I certainly understand that, and there have been differing opinions on this bill. And I'm happy it's included on today's agenda despite being filed as an amendment to this year's NDAA, and I look forward to discussing it further. I finally want to note my disappointment that my bill, H.R. 7469, the Modernizing Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Act, is not one of the bills up for discussion this morning, despite my request that it be included. So many of the most important issues we debate on this committee, from suicide prevention to toxic exposure to the character of discharge, come down to the questions of eligibility. It's been more than 2 decades since the current VA's eligibility system was created. To say that the world and the veteran population looks much differently now than it did would be a gross understatement. I think we are fighting a losing battle, continually trying to make an outdated 20th century priority group system meet the standards of a modern 21st century veteran community. And the VA healthcare system, and it's time for a renewed national conversation about who VA was designated to serve and how best to meet those needs. My bill, which would be based on the recommendation from the Bipartisan Commission on Care under President Obama, would create the mechanism for that conversation. I sincerely hope we can include it on the next agenda for our next legislative hearing in September. I expect our legislative hearing in September will also include a number of mental health and suicide prevention bills that your staff have been working on, Mr. Chairman. As I've said before, I fully support you in making suicide prevention this committee's highest priority of the 116th Congress. However, I'm concerned that after months of debate on General Bergman's Improve Act last fall, there's been no legislative action on veteran suicide prevention yet this year. The pandemic has undoubtedly impacted regular order, but our committee has nonetheless worked to advance several bills on a number of other important topics through the House in the last several months. Bills to address veteran suicide have not been among them, though. With just a few weeks left on the House calendar, I hope that we can begin putting our money where our mouth is and act with the urgency that the veteran suicide crisis deserves, and enact meaningful legislation to save lives of veterans at risk without further delay. And before I yield back, I want to say that 2 sponsors of bills today, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey and Congressman Buddy Carter from Georgia, wanted to participate. And I do want to recommend, and I know that this has been a difficult time, but we've always included non-members if they wanted to testify in front of our committee. We allowed them to do that, both Democrat and Republican. We've done that historically. And we could have done that today. I know this is a long hearing, but we could have done that today through WebEx. I don't like that. I much prefer in person, and I know it's cumbersome to have to clean everything up, but this is incredibly important work. And I know that we've had numerous both Democrats and Republicans who had bills, allowed them to come up as members and to have their say about their bill. And I wish we had done that today to allow them that. And if we had to do it over 2 days, I'm fine with that, because I have that much respect for the members who want to promote their bill. They've obviously put a lot of time in it. Veterans have come in to their office, and I would encourage the chairman to include those going forward for our future hearings. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. And with regard to your final comments, I regret that we can't have participation of our colleagues as we usually do. The circumstances that we are confronted with are truly extraordinary. We've had VSOs had to submit statements for the record, and their participation is also important. But we've had to ask VSOs and members who are not on the committee to submit. And we've been fair to both sides. We've insisted on the submission of statements by members of the majority party as opposed to their direct participation. And it is my regret and disappointment that they cannot participate due to the circumstances. So I do hear your frustration, but I do point to our extraordinary circumstances. I now would like to point out that we have 20 bills to be discussed today. Committee members will have 2 minutes to discuss their bills. Non-committee members will have submitted their statements for the record outlining their bills. First up is Congressman Levin. You're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Takano, and I sincerely thank my fellow committee members for all the bipartisan progress we're making to serve our veterans. I appreciate you holding this hearing on several bills of great importance to our veterans, including H.R. 4526, the Bryan Talley VA Employment Transparency Act, which I introduced last September with Mark Meadows. I want to take a moment to share Mr. Talley's story, which illustrates why this legislation is so important. And I've had a chance to meet with Bryan Talley. He even joined me for a community coffee in my district, and he is a tireless and effective advocate for this cause. In January of 2016, Mr. Talley began experiencing debilitating back pain and sought care at the VA. The doctor diagnosed him with a lower back sprain, denied him a blood test or MRI, and prescribed him painkillers. In March of 2016, Mr. Talley's family paid for an MRI in the community, which revealed he had been given a near-fatal misdiagnosis. Instead of a lower back sprain, he had structural damage to his back, and his ensuing surgery revealed a bone-eating staph infection that was destroying his spine. Mr. Talley filed a claim with VA for medical malpractice and gross neglect, but it took nearly a year for VA to inform him that his doctor was not a VA employee. Because the doctor was an independent contractor, Mr. Talley had to file a claim in state court. Devastatingly, at that point, the statute of limitations had passed, leaving him and his family without any recourse over the suffering they experienced. It is unacceptable that any veteran would be denied the opportunity to pursue a claim due to a lack of transparency at the VA. That's why the Bryan Talley VA Employment Transparency Act requires the VA, within 30 days of a veteran submitting a claim, to provide notice of, first, the importance of securing legal counsel, second, the employment status of any individual involved in the claim, and third, the statute of limitations in the relevant state if the claim involves a contractor. Very basic stuff. This bill will help ensure that veterans receive the information they need to make timely decisions about their legal options and seek recourse if they're harmed as a result of substandard medical treatment. I look forward to hearing our witnesses' testimony on this legislation, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. Members, let's try to attend to our time. We've got a lot of bills to go through today. Our next, Mr. Pappas, Mr. Pappas is, I think, next, right?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and
Pappas,
to the
go ahead.
and to the ranking member for holding this legislative hearing. I'm pleased we have a number of great bills on the agenda here today, including two bills that I've offered. The first is H.R. 3582, which would be a much-needed step forward toward equality by amending VA's definition of a minority group member to include lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender veterans. The VA's Center for Minority Veterans was established in 1994 to ensure that all veterans receive equal access to services and benefits regardless of their race, origin, religion, or gender. They conduct targeted outreach promoting VA benefits to minorities, establish and improve VA programs for the specific needs of minorities, and receive and assess complaints of minority veterans. Unfortunately, the center was established during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era, and the definition of a minority group member did not include any reference to LGBTQ veterans. While VA does certainly provide service and conduct outreach to these veterans, they do not have an official home in VA policy. This bill would right that wrong, and I was pleased to see the VA does not object to this legislation. My second bill, the Bipartisan Burial Equity for Guards and Reserves Act of 2020, does exactly what the title indicates. It ensures that the honorably discharged men and women of our National Guard and Reserve components can be laid can be laid to rest at state veteran cemeteries. Under current law, in order to be buried in a cemetery under the control of the VA's National Cemetery Administration, a veteran must meet certain requirements. Broadly speaking, they must receive an other than honorable discharge and serve at least one complete period of active duty. Most states own and operate their own state veteran cemeteries and can determine their own policies about who qualifies for interment. But as soon as these state veteran cemeteries accept grant money from NCA, which most do, they have to abide by NCA's policy and definition on who qualifies as a veteran. My bill doesn't force VA to modify its policy on interment in their cemeteries, nor does it force state veteran cemeteries to inter anyone they don't choose to. It simply says that a state veteran cemetery, if they choose to inter an honorably discharged member of the Guard and Reserve or their spouse, their federal grant money can't be withheld. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. Ms. Brownlee, you're recognized for 2 minutes. Be sure to pause 2 or 3 seconds. Ms. Brownlee, are you? Ms. Brownlee, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Okay, just pause a couple of seconds. All right, now go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing on my bill, the Dental Care for Veterans Act. As you know, approximately 9 million veterans are currently enrolled in the VA healthcare system. However, current law restricts VA's ability to provide dental care to most veterans. In fact, only 534,000 veterans receive dental care from the VA. And for the 94% of enrolled veterans who do not receive VA dental care benefits, the cost of obtaining private sector dental coverage is often too expensive, leaving many veterans with no dental care at all. My bill would fix this problem and authorize the VA to provide dental care to all veterans enrolled in the VA healthcare system. As you may know, in 2018, Congress passed the Veterans Benefits and Transitions Act, which required VA to report to Congress on the feasibility and advisability of expanding VA dental care benefits to all veterans. In the report, which was issued in December of 2019, VA noted that, quote, "It is expected that the provision of dental services could result in some reduction in total healthcare costs. As presented by the Mayo Clinic of 2019, poor oral health can have a significant negative effect on overall health. Neglecting oral health can contribute to health problems, including bacterial, pneumonia, cardiovascular disease, and oral cancer. Improving our oral health is therefore expected to decrease the cost of treating medical conditions worsened by poor oral health," end quote. As Congress and VA work together to address veterans' whole health, we must treat veterans' dental care just as integrally to their overall health as their medical care. The Dental Care for Veterans Act will accomplish this. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. We now will move to Ms. Underwood. Ms. Underwood, remember to pause for a couple seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm thankful to the committee for prioritizing these tremendously important issues and to have 2 of the bills I've introduced with my colleagues on the committee in today's hearing. My first bill is the Bipartisan Protecting Moms Who Served Act. This legislation, which I introduced Congressman Levin, is a response to our nation's maternal mortality crisis and how the crisis affects women veterans. The bill authorizes $15 million for VA maternity care coordination, improving prenatal and postpartum care, and expanding access to social services to ensure that moms who serve get the care and support they've earned. My bill also commissions a comprehensive study on maternal mortality and morbidity among women veterans, with a focus on racial and ethnic disparities. To prevent maternal complications, we need a robust understanding of the unique risks facing women who have served, including PTSD and military sexual trauma. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to submit for the record these 2 statements from the Center for Reproductive Rights and from the coalition of 26 groups in support of the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood.
Mr. Chairman, that was a unanimous consent request.
Oh, without
submit?
objection, without objection.
Okay. I'm also delighted to be able to speak with you today about the ACE Veterans Act, which I introduced with Congressman Lamb. Many veterans, especially younger women veterans, rely on VHA for contraceptive care. Reliable and uninterrupted access to contraception is extremely important to reproductive health care. This bill gives women veterans the option to receive a full year's supply of contraceptive through VHA, where many are currently limited to a 3-month supply. Evidence from a 2019 VA-sponsored study conducted with the University of Pittsburgh demonstrates that a full year dispensing option both improves health outcomes for women and lowers costs for VA. I discussed the importance of this issue with Dr. Hayes, the Chief Consultant for Women's Health Services for VA, in a hearing earlier this month, and I'm glad that VA is supportive of working to expand access to 1-year dispensing. I'm glad the committee is considering both of these important bills today, and I urge my colleagues to support them. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Thank you. We now have next to present is Mr. Cisneros. I'm sorry, excuse me, not Mr. Cisneros, it's Ms. Rice. Ms. Rice, excuse me, please be sure to pause for a couple seconds. So Ms. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Chairman Takano for including the Honoring All Veterans Act in today's legislative hearing. I'd also like to thank my colleague on the other side of the aisle, Congressman Bryan, for joining me in introducing this bipartisan legislation. Simply put, the Department of Veterans Affairs needs to change its motto to be more inclusive of women and LGBTQ veterans. The current motto does not reflect the diversity of today's veteran population. Since our founding, women and LGBTQ military service members have answered the call of duty to defend the homeland in our times of need. Women have been serving since the Revolutionary War, long before President Lincoln gave his second inaugural address. The refusal to acknowledge their service not only makes women veterans feel invisible, but it also erases their history. They were always there for us when we needed them, and they should never feel that their service and sacrifice is unrecognized or unappreciated. We must ensure these veterans receive the respect they deserve and ensure they feel welcome in the facilities meant to care for them. That's why our bill to update the VA motto is so important. It is the first step in ensuring all veterans are equally embraced by the agency that serves them. I want to thank the witnesses who have taken the time to join us here today. I look forward to working with you and my colleagues on the committee to advance this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. We now move on to Mr. Cisneros. You're recognized for 2 minutes. Please remember to pause for a couple seconds.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, for including my legislation, H.R. 7163, the VA Freedom of Information Act, Reform Act of 2020. During today's hearing, I was proud to introduce this bill with my friend and colleague, Congressman Max Rose. Our legislation would help increase transparency in the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and decrease its Freedom of Information, or FOIA, request backlog. The Freedom of Information Act, first enacted into law in 1966, establishes a legal right to access government information, underscoring the importance of transparency to citizens in our democracy. However, data from the Department of Justice demonstrates that, in practice, many of our citizens have been unable to access documents under this law due to the backlog of FOIA requests, and the VA is not immune. It is not uncommon for congressional offices, including mine, to have congressional casework requests to help secure FOIA documents. Our veterans should not need congressional intervention to access documents they are entitled to under federal law. The VA FOIA Reform Act works to address the ongoing problem with tangible goals to help keep the VA accountable. The legislation requires the VA to reduce their current FOIA backlog by 75% within 3 years. It also requires a review of the VA FOIA practices by an independent office within the National Archives and requires the VA to develop a plan to address the technological, budgetary, and other root causes that contribute to the backlog. Finally, it requires the VA to report to Congress on a plan to implement real and lasting solutions to help veterans access to documents that they need. This is common sense legislation supported by the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Paralyzed Veterans of America, Demand Progress, and the Project of Government Oversight. I thank the committee for holding this hearing and urge that it be marked up with deliberate speed. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cisneros. Congressman Boss, you're recognized for 2 minutes. Please remember to pause for a couple of seconds.
Thank you, Chairman Tricano. I'm proud to be the co-sponsor of two bills on today's agenda. The first bill is H.R. 7287, would improve access to in-person telehealth exams for our nation's veterans. Under current law, only physicians can perform VA exams outside of the state in which they are licensed in, commonly known as license portability. However, a non-physician contract examiner may only conduct a disability and exam in the state in which they are licensed. My bill, H.R. 7287, would address this issue by expanding license portability to physicians' assistants, nurses and practitioners, audiologists, and psychologists. As a result, contract vendors may be able to schedule the veterans' exams sooner. For example, a veteran in my district in Illinois may have to wait months to see an audiologist for a contract disability exam for hearing loss. However, the vendor may have the capacity to send a non-physician healthcare professional licensed in California to Illinois to provide the audiology exam for the veteran in just a few weeks. My bill is a straightforward solution that provides exam vendors with the flexibility needed to provide quality service to the veterans in less time. Another of my bills in today's agenda is H.R. 7445. From COVID-19 to floods, fires, and civil unrest, members of the National Guard and Army Reserve have shown that they are always ready and always there. The last thing we should do is have them have to worry about whether or not they can receive a home loan from the VA. I'm proud to lead this effort in Congress to ensure that the families of this National Guard and Army Reserve have access to resources to help purchase a home while they are sacrificing so much to keep our communities safe and healthy. I want to thank Representative Cunningham for his helping to introduce this legislation. I would also like to thank the VSOs who are supporting this bill, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bost. Mr. Barr, you are now recognized. Remember to pause a couple of seconds before you begin.
Thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Rowe, for holding this legislative hearing. Among the bills being reviewed today is a draft of one of my bills, the Veterans Benefits Fairness and Transparency Act. The inspiration for this legislation came from Denny Hart, himself a veteran and who is an active member and participant in the Kentucky's 6th District Veterans Coalition. Mr. Hart regularly assists fellow veterans with the VA disability claims process, and he brought this to my attention that there is a problem with DBQs, the disability benefit questionnaires, in that process. What he brought to my attention was that in multiple cases he experienced that in between a veteran getting their disability benefit questionnaire, or DBQ, filled out by a non-department medical provider, and the VA then submitting the DBQ to the VA, that the VA had updated the form, making the previously completed DBQ invalid. My bill would fix this and require that when changes are made to the DBQs, the VA must accept the DBQ completed by a non-VA medical provider for up to 1 year after the provider fills out the form, as long as the DBQ was current at the time it was filled out. There was a lot of confusion and difficulty when the VA would update these DBQs, and it would disqualify otherwise eligible veterans from getting their disability benefits. Additionally, if a new version of the DBQ is released before the veteran submits their previously completed DBQ, which currently would make it an outdated form in the eyes of the VA, the bill would allow the VA to request additional information from the veteran if that information is required by the new version of the DBQ. My bill would also require the VA to resume publishing DBQs on VA's public-facing website after the VA discontinued this practice during the pandemic. I believe we should make it easier, not harder, for our veterans to access the tools they need to apply for their disability claims, and I welcome my colleagues to co-sponsor the bill. And I thank also the VSOs who have supported this, including DAV, VFW, IAVA, and others. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of personal privilege for a brief moment. On behalf of the committee, I just want to welcome our friend from Kentucky back and just let him know that he's been in our prayers and thoughts and well wishes, and will continue to be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Gentleman from Kentucky is certainly welcome back, and we certainly express our deepest condolences for what you've been going through personally, and welcome back, sir. Yeah. Mr. Rose, you recognize for 2 minutes.
I'd like to thank Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, for their leadership in holding this legislative hearing, and to all the veteran services organizations who submitted their statements today. Many of the bills we're considering today are absolutely common sense, things that the VA wants to implement now for our veterans' benefit. These are bills mandating fairness, transparency, like the Forgotten Vietnam Veterans Act that I proudly co-sponsored, to give our Vietnam veterans who served voluntarily the recognition that they deserve, or the VA Foia Reform Act that I co-lead with my esteemed colleague, Rep. Cisneros, to reduce the backlogs of FOIA requests at VA. And certainly my bill to update the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, a set of key employment discrimination protections for our service members to include National Guardsmen who are called up for state active duty orders. The last thing we should be doing while our guardsmen are protecting us, our guardswomen are building our medical infrastructure, supporting our states and communities through the COVID crisis, is to allow them to be denied employment when they return to civilian jobs. When I was activated for the National Guard several months ago, I had the luxury of returning to my job here once my service was done with zero issue. The fact that varying state laws can determine if that is actually the case is wrong, and something that my bill addresses. The feedback from VSOs on this bill is clear. With the VFW, the Minority Veterans of America, the Military Women's Coalition supporting these necessary protections for our guardsmen. Now is not the time to play political games with our veterans' livelihoods and benefits. I implore the VA to get this done, to work through these concerns that they may have, to defend our veterans and service members during these trying times, and I urge my colleagues to support these key measures. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. I now invite our first panel to the witness table. Our first witness panel consists of members from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And appearing before us this morning, we have Dr. Maria Llorente, Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for Health for Patient Care Services, the Veterans Health Administration. We have Beth Murphy, Executive Director of Compensation Service Veterans Benefits Administration from the VBA. Glenn Powers, Deputy Undersecretary for Field Programs and Cemetery Operations from the National Cemetery Administration, the NCA. And appearing virtually, we have Dr. Amanda Johnson, Director of Reproductive Health, and Yuri Walker, Director of Risk Management, Director of the Risk Management Program, Office of Integrity from the VHA, and Charmaine Bogue, Executive Director, Education Service from the VBA. I just want to know that all of you have written statements, and your written statements in full will be included in the hearing record. I please remind you that when you're called on to pause for 2 or 3 seconds before speaking so that the recording will capture all of your words. And please remember to do so when answering members' questions. Without objection, Dr. Llorente, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us to present our views on several bills that would affect Department of Veterans Affairs programs and services. Unfortunately, I won't be able to talk about every bill on the agenda during my oral statement, but I would like to highlight a few. VA's views are provided on all the bills in more detail in our written statement. H.R. 3228 would expand the definition of covered healthcare professional to authorize a health professional trainee to participate in telemedicine. VA supports the bill, but would like the committee to consider further expansion of this definition to integrate telehealth into the capabilities of all VA healthcare professionals, which allows VA to leverage our clinical assets in support of veterans' access to care. We are happy to work with the committee to provide technical assistance. H.R. 2435 would establish a task force on outdoor recreation for veterans. VA supports increasing access to public lands to promote the overall health and wellness of our veteran patients, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss minor technical concerns with the committee. H.R. 2791 would require VA to establish an advisory committee to provide guidance on matters relating to Indian tribes, tribal organizations, and Native American veterans. VA supports this bill as an opportunity to strengthen and expand partnerships between VA and tribal governments, provided Congress appropriates additional funding. H.R. 4908, the Native American PACT Act, would prohibit VA from collecting a healthcare copayment from a veteran who is an Indian or urban Indian. VA supports the bill and welcomes the opportunity to provide technical assistance. VA supports the license portability bill because it would authorize the department to contract with both non-physician healthcare providers and physicians to conduct examinations for disability benefits claims. VA would have the flexibility to utilize a wider range of qualified professionals to conduct these exams, and this would expand the operating capacity of all vendors, resulting in shorter wait times and faster exam completion times. VA also fully supports the Home Loan Benefits Bill, which would expand benefits to certain members of the reserve components of the armed forces, including those currently serving in the COVID response. We'd be pleased to work with the committee on technical aspects of the bill. The Advisory Committee on Minority Veterans consists of members appointed by the Secretary from the general public, including representatives of veterans who are minority group members. VA does not object to H.R. 3582, which would include lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender individuals in the work of that committee. H.R. 7111 would require VA to provide up to 12 months of retraining assistance to no more than 35,000 eligible veterans to pursue a covered program of education. VA has several significant concerns regarding the implementation and administration of this bill. Our written testimony outlines in detail the potential unintended hardships that the bill's eligibility criteria may create for unemployed veterans, as well as technical challenges VA would face implementing this program. The Veterans Employment Through Technology Education Courses, or VET-TECH program, already has infrastructure in place and is experiencing tremendous success. VA recognizes the importance of expanding pathways to jobs beyond a traditional degree program through retraining and appreciates the work of the committee to expand such opportunities. Rather than creating a new short-term program in a short time frame, VA recommends modifying the VET-TECH program by expanding the eligibility criteria to achieve positive effects in as short a time as possible. VA does not support H.R. 6039. VA estimates that over 18 million veterans are buried in cemeteries not managed by VA, a state, or a tribal government. This gives you a sense of the number of veterans' grave sites for which VA could be asked to assume operational responsibilities under the precedent that would be set by this bill. VA does not have the resources to address these requirements. Transfer of a cemetery that fell into disrepair due to an owner's neglect would make VA vulnerable to future bailout requests. Lastly, VA opposes the Veteran Benefits Fairness and Transparency Act of 2020, which would require VA to publish Disability Benefit Questionnaire Forms, or DBQs. This bill would overturn a recently announced VA policy to no longer make DBQs publicly available. VA has observed a growing industry marketing the service of completing DBQs, some of which have business practices that are detrimental to veterans. VA believes that the bill would exacerbate these abuses, and VA does not have the enforcement authority to address violations. Our written statement provides suggestions for authorities and resources VA could use to address such abuses. The bill would require VA to accept outdated versions of a DBQ while applying current laws and regulations to adjudicate the claim, creating confusion that could disrupt the smooth operation of the claims process. VBA has significantly expanded its capability to provide disability exams in remote areas, making obsolete the need for publicly available DBQs. This concludes my statement, Mr. Chairman. We'd be happy now to answer any questions you or the other members of the committee may have. And may I just say, this is my first time appearing before Congress, and it's a very real privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Llorente, and welcome, and we hope it's a good experience for you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions of the panel. My first question is actually, I don't expect it to be answered by anyone from the panel, but I will ask for a response for the record from the Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs. A longstanding requirement for hearings is that witnesses submit testimony at least 48 hours in advance of their appearance before the committee. Therefore, VA's testimony for this hearing was due to the committee by no later than 10 a.m. on Tuesday, July 21st. We did not receive the testimony until 7:05 p.m. This is unacceptable. This has become a regular occurrence, and VA's usual response is that it is held up at OMB. This is not acceptable. I would like a written response that explains when VA completed drafting its testimony, when it was submitted to OMB for clearance, and when it was returned to VA to send to the committee. I would also like VA to include a plan on how it will work with OMB to improve the timeliness of testimony submission. If VA wants us to consider its views on legislation or on any manner when it needs to ensure it complies with the committee's rules in order to testify. I want you to know that a Republican chairman once of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, dismissed people from the administration when they did not comply. This is a disrespect of Congress, and it must stop. Now, I want to move on to disparities. I think this committee and VA share the mutual goals of improving policy so that we can increase access to health care and services for all veterans. I was extremely pleased to see VA's support of our efforts to improve access for Native veterans through Mr. Gallego's Native American PACT Act and Ms. Holland's Tribal Advisory Committee Act. But I'm a bit dismayed to see VA's tepid response to H.R. 3582, which would add LGBTQ veterans to Minority Veterans Advisory Committee. Dr. Llorente, does VA believe that it has sufficient competencies to meet the unique needs of LGBTQ veterans, meaning that they already possess all they need to know about their very specific unique needs, and therefore VA would not benefit from their inclusion in the advisory committee?
Thank you for that extremely important question, Chairman Takano. The LGBT program office actually reports to me. And so I don't think that we have everything that we need to be able to best serve the needs of this very unique patient veteran population. That's the reason why we're perfectly fine with the language in the bill, and we have no disagreement whatsoever with it.
Well, is VA trying to send a message by simply, quote, not objecting, end quote, to having LGBTQ veterans on the advisory committee?
Sir,
as opposed to your enthusiastic support of Native Americans on the advisory committee?
To the best of my knowledge, sir, VA there's no difference between the levels of encouragement.
I don't understand
and
why VA cannot also embrace and say that you would support the inclusion. Why the legislation is not support instead of not objecting.
Understood, sir.
Well, maybe the VA might want to change its position. Currently, LGBTQ veterans are not included in the definition of minority veterans under Title 38. What limitations does this definition put on VA's ability to serve LGBTQ veterans?
So I think that one of the advantages to having LGBT membership on this advisory committee is that they would be able to look at the VA services from an external perspective. Most certainly, internally, we receive a tremendous amount of feedback. We do, as you mentioned, outreach to our LGBT veterans. But having the external stakeholder perspective would be, I think, particularly beneficial. It would also enable us to have a better understanding of how effective our message and our messaging was in terms of reaching veterans who perhaps were not yet accessing, or LGBT veterans who were not yet accessing our healthcare system. So I think it would be highly beneficial.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rente. On May 28th, the chairs of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus, and I wrote to VA requesting data on the impact of COVID-19 on minority veterans. It took nearly 2 months before we received anything, and we did not receive, and what we did receive came with a disclaimer, quote, that the data is incomplete due to data availability, end quote. Chairwoman Brownlee held a hearing back in February where missing minority data was discussed, and VA made assurances it was working on it. We cannot make good policy without good data, but VA seems to be challenged in collecting demographic data for veterans, which it has pegged to problems with an IT system. Dr. Llorente, what is it going to take to address this? Is VA going to come with us with a proposal to fix the problem?
So I also thank you for that question. And it is true that trying to determine race and ethnicity is a challenge. I think it's not just an IT challenge, but it is a challenge. I think one of the other issues is that right now, in spite of or despite COVID, we have been undertaking efforts to fix some of these problems in the new electronic health record, working through the Cerner system, so that some of these additional challenges, particularly when it comes to things like gender identity versus biological sex, it does and has presented problems for VA. And so I want to assure you, sir, that we are working very diligently on trying to come up with new solutions so that we have better access to understanding our data, because you're absolutely right. When we have good, solid, accurate data, then we make better policy decisions.
Thank you. I've exceeded my time. I now recognize Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments and then some questions. One, on Mr. Barr's bill, I think that bill wouldn't have even come up had the VA been, I can see what's happened. You fill out the forms, the form changes, you submit it, and then you got to submit another form. If it had been working properly, that bill would never have come up. So I think the VA's excuse there is a little weak. I think you should accept, if it was acceptable at one point, it should be, and then if you need more information, you can figure that out. Secondly, on Mrs. Rice, Congresswoman Rice's bill about honoring all Veterans Act, I know I was on the phone with one of these hearings when it came up, and it seemed simple to me to just honor those who served and not just men who served. I'm supportive of her bill, and I don't know that it would have much effect. It doesn't diminish the great speech that President Lincoln gave. That could still stay at the VA. What is the reason for the VA's opposition to that? Because things have changed in the last 170 years.
We recognize that this is a very sensitive issue. And I think that there are a couple of things to try, at least that we try to keep in mind. The first is it does acknowledge and recognize that our existence is due to Lincoln's efforts. He was trying to heal the nation, and the first place he went was to heal her veterans. We're very proud of that. It's really where our mission begins. Since that time, you're right, our mission has grown. It's expanded. We care for women veterans and men veterans. We take care of LGBT and straight veterans. We offer services to veterans who served in peacetime, as well as those that have gone into battle. Recently, we were given additional authorities to be able to serve veterans with less than honorable discharges. And as many of you are aware, most recently, during COVID response in our fourth mission, we've supported the state veterans' homes.
Excuse me, I don't want to interrupt you, but my time's going to be short, and my question is, why wouldn't we just honor all veterans by changing those in two other words and not dishonor President Lincoln? That's only my statement to that. Secondly, on the bill 7111, the bill that we have to retrain, look, I don't have any problem at all. I just want to get the veterans trained, and it would not, I think you mentioned in your testimony, it would make hardships for veterans. What's a hardship is not having a job that you're trained to do. So what I would do is if you can do that at light speed, because this has happened at light speed. The thing I heard in my district in February is, Dr. O, we can't find anybody to work, and literally in 6 weeks we went to 22 million people unemployed. So we need to respond, not in a year or two, we need to respond right now to retrain these folks, because those jobs are going to be different. There's no question that our economy is going to look different coming out of this than it did going in. If the VA could do that timely, I have no problem with that. All I want to do is make sure that the veterans get retrained. So if we do this, if we can work this out, I'm fine either way. I don't have a problem with that. On a couple of questions on Ms. Underwood's bill 4281, I would recommend on the access to contraception expansion for veterans. Look, when I saw patients in my office, I was prescribing birth control pills, I gave them a couple of sample packs, let them try those. If they had a problem with them, we changed it. I certainly would discourage the passing where you just get a year's supply and you have to throw them all in the trash because you can't take them. That makes no sense to me. So if there's a way to get a couple of months, 3 months, whatever, and then get your year's supply. That, I'm fine with that. Question I have is, does VA classify the abortifacient medication like Plan B as contraception? And if so, would enactment of H.R. 4281, the Access to Contraception Expansion for Veterans Act, allow VA to issue a year's supply of those medications to a veteran patient?
I don't know the answer to that question, but perhaps Dr. Johnson, who's available virtually, may have that response.
Thank you.
Yes, this is Amanda Johnson. I hope you can hear me, and thank you, Dr. Rowe, for your question. So emergency contraception, or Plan B, is available as a contraceptive method to our veterans. It is not considered an abortifacient. It is progesterone, as I think you know, would not affect or cause actually any harm to an existing or ongoing pregnancy, and that is considered contraception, and it is available to our veterans.
Okay, thank you for your answer. With that, I'm out of time. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. We now move to Ms. Brownlee for her 5 minutes. Ms. Brownlee, please remember the pause for a couple of seconds.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
We can. Please proceed. Ms. Brownlee, we can't hear you. We could hear you when you asked me if you could hear us, but we can't hear you now. So can you, I don't know if it's you on the mute button or whether it's some other problem.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. For whatever reason, my mute button was not allowing me to unmute, but I think I'm back in the game here, so I apologize.
You are, so why don't you start now? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Lorenta, for being here today. And I certainly wanted to address with you why VA doesn't support the Dental Care for All Veterans Act. And it's just, to me, when the VA has a report that actually says the VA can save money, when you look at the whole health of a veteran, that the VA can actually save money, I think it's abundantly clear that the VA affirms that they want to provide health care for the whole health to our veterans. And so I'm just puzzled why the VA is not looking at this holistically in a way that says, if we provide the dental care to our veterans, the cost of their overall health care is going to go down. So can you talk to me a little bit more? I know in your testimony you talk about the overall cost of getting 94% more veterans on a dental plan and the cost of that. But to look at the overall cost and cost savings, why the VA doesn't look at it from that perspective.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Brownlee. Let me just say that clinically, I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, and I know firsthand many of the dental needs that our patients have. This bill is in keeping with our desire and our mission to serve the needs of our veterans, including their oral health care. But in a nutshell, VA does not have the resources to be able to expand dental care services, even as provided in the bill, to do it by priority group and over a 4-year period. We don't have the resources from a capacity perspective, and we don't have the resources from a funding perspective. From the capacity perspective, most of our clinics nationwide are either at or near capacity. And so we don't have the resources to expand. And please remember that it's not just the expansion of adding clinical staff, it's also the space, it's also developing additional operatories, it's purchasing the dental chairs, the dental equipment, the dental instruments. There are a lot of
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that. But you do acknowledge that there is a cost savings here overall when we're looking at the whole health of our veterans.
I am not sufficiently familiar with the cost estimates or the costing to understand whether it's an equal effect or whether whether it would be a cost savings or a no-sum game. I'm just not sufficiently familiar with that estimate.
I'll be happy to send you the VA report that says explicitly that they believe that there is ultimately a cost savings when we're looking at the whole health of our veterans. I also wanted to speak to the VA motto issue, and I really applaud my colleague Congresswoman Rice for her continued work in this effort. I heard your responses to Dr. Rowe, and I thank Dr. Rowe, for his support around this, I think, important issue as well. And I believe what he is saying is absolutely true, that, a small change in what was said can, bring the VA to the 21st century where women are serving equally as men on the battlefield, and also not to, change the course of history in terms of what President Lincoln said. And as Mr. Takano said in his opening comments, I think if Lincoln were here, he would wholeheartedly agree with us. So I'll just ask the question. It seems as though the VA is unwilling, but what is the VA willing, I guess, to solicit any formal feedback before, within a survey or something, to hear from the entire veteran population on how they feel about this so that you can get their input? Is that something that you're willing to do?
I think that VA is always willing to accept feedback and information and opinions from our internal consumers, our veterans, as well as our external stakeholders. Yes, my experience in VA has been that we always welcome feedback.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. And we now move on to, I think it's Ms. Radewagen. Ms. Radewagen, please remember to pause before you start your questions for a couple of seconds. Ms. Radewagen, I think you need to unmute your device. Ms. Radewagen?
Thank you, Chairman Takano.
We can hear you now, so just pause a couple of seconds and then proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Rowe, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for their testimony. I'm proud to co-sponsor some of the bills on today's docket, namely H.R. 7111, 2435, and 6082. I appreciate all the work my colleagues have put into these pieces of legislation, and I hope that this hearing will help us work through any remaining concerns regarding the details of these bills. It's a process, to be sure, one I'm thankful every day to be part of. I have a question here for Dr. Llorente, or anyone on your team, really. Please detail why VA feels justified to use a start date for the Vietnam era, February 28, 1961, that differs from DOD's November 1, 1955. I would think that DOD would be better positioned than VA to define when a period of armed conflict began.
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Murphy.
Good morning. There are a lot of dates that are talked about here. We see 1964, we see 1961, now we see 1955. When we set this 25 years ago at 1961, it was based on when our military was involved in more than just advisory or supportive roles. It was linked to when we started to accompany the South Vietnamese troops in combat operations. So while DOD looks at a broader picture of maybe involvement we're looking at this from VA purposes and for benefits purposes, wartime service. So we're not seeing the rational basis, the compelling reason to change it to the earlier date, 1955, since that was more of just a participation and a support role.
And with regards to HR 2111, this is for Dr. Urente or any of the team members. Do you have preliminary outcome measures on the Vet Tech pilot program that you can share with us?
Ms. Bogue, who is with us virtually, will be able to respond to that question.
Good morning. Thank you for that question. So yes, we do have some preliminary data when it comes to our Vet Tech, the Vet Tech 5-year pilot program. That program has been in existence for a little bit over a year now. And to date, we've supported nearly 1,600 students who have participated in a program. Of those 1,600 students, we've had nearly 900 students who've completed a program. We're actually seeing about 300 students who've actually found employment. And the median average for salary for those folks is actually $60,000, with the highest salary being $228,000, and the lowest range of that is about $30,000 in terms of salary. So we're definitely seeing some very positive results, considering that program has been rolled out in the last year and a half time frame.
I had one last question on 2435, but I don't know how many minutes I have left, if any. I just know that it's 3 o'clock.
Ms. Radewagen, you have a minute and a half. Ms. Radewagen, you have a minute and a half, so please proceed.
All right. So on 2435, what specific situations in which outdoor leisure and recreational experiences might be prescribed for the therapeutic benefit that veteran patients are limited by the current terminology in HR 2435, the Accelerating Veterans Recoveries Outdoor Act? Dr. Urente or any team member, please.
Yes, thank you for that question, and I can actually give you a very, very specific example. Medical treatment and recreational therapy and a recreational therapist have very specific connotations and definitions. Every year, I go with a group of my Vietnam combat veteran patients to the wall on Veterans Day. It's a use of public lands. It's a very therapeutic activity. Am I delivering medical treatment? No, not really. Am I a recreational therapist? No, I'm not. Am I delivering recreational therapy? No. Is it therapeutic for my veterans? It absolutely is. And that's the reason why we'd like to work with the committee to expand the scope and the definitions so that other psychiatrists, other professionals, other healthcare providers in our system can work with our veterans groups and with our public lands in order to afford more of those kinds of experiences for our veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Radewagen. I now call on Ms. Rice for 5 minutes. Ms. Rice, be sure to turn on your microphone and pause for a couple of seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lorente, I'd like to talk to you, obviously, about the Honoring All Veterans Act. I had the opportunity to speak to Secretary Wilkie and ask him specifically whether he would be willing to support this. And he went into a pretty lengthy monologue about how important it is to honor the words of one of the greatest presidents in our country. And then I think even he began to understand that that argument is misguided and misleading. And then his opposition kind of morphed into, the cost is just going to be too great. And then after throwing out the cost, Secretary Wilkie, a short time after that, started talking about putting up a bronze plaque containing the motto as it currently stands at every federal veteran cemetery, of which I believe there are about 170 in the country. So that belied his second reason for not wanting to change the motto, being one of cost, because the bronze plaque was going to be at every cemetery is going to be far more costly than changing the motto overall. The VA, I think it's important to note, only adopted the current motto, which was a quote from President Lincoln 60 years ago. My bill, the Honoring All Veterans Act, does not change Lincoln's words. It modernizes a mission statement to recognize and honor the service of all veterans. Other military institutions have already enacted meaningful changes to their cultures and traditions to include women veterans and reflect the diversity of today's veteran population, yet the VA continues to lag behind. I want to thank the ranking member, Dr. Rowe, for his support of this bill. It means so much to me personally to have him be an advocate for this change. And when he was speaking to you, he asked you, if you could tell what the reasons were. I also appreciate Ms. Brownlee and her support of this bill, and she asked you about whether you would be willing to take a survey and see how veterans feel about this issue. In fact, a recent survey from Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, IAVA, revealed that 68% of their members support changing the motto or are neutral on the issue. VA officials have previously expressed that the department is committed to addressing cultural problems and barriers to care for women veterans. I strongly believe that updating the VA motto would be a significant step forward towards this goal and mark a powerful commitment to promoting a culture at VA that respects all veterans, to say nothing of the impact that it would have on the sexual harassment and assault that women veterans face all across this country, and the sometimes subpar medical health care they have access to through the VA. So, Dr. Laurenti, is there any other reason other than it's not appropriate to change Lincoln's words or it's going to cost too much that you can provide to explain the department's continued and really unjustifiable opposition to changing the VA motto that you can tell us here today?
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your question. The VA, and I'm confident in what I'm about to say, the VA and those of us who work for the VA understand that our mission is very, very broad. We understand that we are here to provide health care, earned benefits, and interments to all of our veterans. It's an inclusive mission. I appreciate that there are complexities to this situation and to this issue. I think that providing feedback is constructive and helpful. At this point, however, the VA's position is that we do not see a need to enact a new motto.
The motto is not inclusive. You are saying here that the VA recognizes it is to be inclusive, to represent the full breadth and diversity of our military. And yet, the one thing that you can do to send the message to every person, man, woman, gay, straight, who was worn the uniform of this great country of ours, is to have the motto not exclude them the second they walk through a VA facility. So I honestly, I'm not going to let go of this issue because I just don't understand VA's position on this. And, I think it's important that we look at the veterans advocacy groups that support this. They've been taking surveys. I don't know why the VA has not, because it's your job to represent all veterans, regardless of what they look like. So it's just consistently very disappointing that I can't seem to get an answer. It shows an enormous amount of disrespect to the institution that you are testifying in front of, to say nothing of the disrespect that it shows the over 2 million women who have worn the uniform of this great country of ours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your support of this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. Time is went over, but Phil, I feel like you want to speak out of order. But my next, Mr. Bilirakis, you are now in the room.
Thank you.
You are recognized for 5 minutes to question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. Dr. Llorente and Dr. Johnson, you have testified that the VA does not support H.R. 6141, the Protecting Moms Who Served Act, which is a bill that I've helped lead with Representative Underwood, because you believe it is unnecessary. However, from feedback I've heard at the local level in my state of Florida, demand for maternity care coordination has gone up significantly in the past few years and features a generally high-risk patient population than the private sector. There's also the issue of higher turnover rates within our VISN, as well as lower participation of the number of OB providers in the network area than there used to be, unfortunately, as some have dropped out of the network completely. So this is a real issue. Yet you state that the VA is already actively taking measures to achieve the same goals as the legislation. What specific measures has VA taken to implement to improve access and quality of maternal care provided to veterans through VA? And what actions are being taken to onboard and retain additional maternity care coordinators at facilities that may be in need? If you could answer that question for me, I'd appreciate it. Dr. Llorente first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Congressman. I'd actually like to ask Dr. Johnson to respond.
Okay.
She's a subject matter expert in this area.
That's fine. Please. Dr. Johnson?
Dr. Johnson, you can make sure you turn on your microphone. Dr. Johnson, can you hear us?
Well, I guess we're not getting a response.
We're not getting a response from Dr. Johnson. Why don't we just
Okay.
why don't we just pause for a moment until we try to work this out, Gus?
All right, thank you.
And we'll make sure your time is
I appreciate
credited.
that. I appreciate that.
Dr. Johnson, you're still not being heard. Can you just make sure that your microphone, that you're not muted? We're still not hearing you, Dr. Johnson. Ms. Bellarkis, we can come back to
That'll be
Dr.
fine.
Johnson.
Thank you
If
very
you have other
much.
questions, we can
Again,
come back to Dr. Johnson.
Okay, very good. Thank you, I appreciate it. The next question is for Chairman Bogue. In the VA's testimony, it states that the department does not have the IT capability to pay schools the tuition and fees payments as laid out in H.R. 7111, a bill that I'm proud to co-sponsor with Dr. Rowe and I believe the chairman of the subcommittee, Mike Levin, is on there as well. But I may be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. As 50% when the veteran begins, 25% when they finish, and 25% when they get a job. How is this possible when this is very similar to the structure put in place for the Vet Tech program? Who would like to? Chairman Bogue.
Ms. Bogue will respond to that question. Yes, sir.
Please, thank you.
Ms. Vogue, can you make sure you turn off your mute button? Or you're unmuted? As Ms. Vogue, as Dr. Vogue, yeah. Chairman Vogue. Chairman Vogue? So I'm going to ask for a brief recess until we can figure out the technical impediment. And so let's recess for maybe 5 minutes or so.
Chairman, one of the things we need to do, and I don't know how you do this, we just got a text, Amada had to get, it was 4 a.m. for her this hearing.
Yeah.
I wonder is there a way we can accommodate those credible time zones? I know, I guess she's back in, so obviously in Samoa.
Is she back in on,
Yes, she had to get up at 3 a.m. How do we do that? How do we accommodate, she's a good member and she never goes on very long either.
no.
The hard thing is if we wait until afternoon, which would
And
make
you
it a
get
little
interrupted by
easier,
votes.
now we're right in the middle of votes and
I don't know
this
how you
just
do it.
makes everything complex. There's nothing easy about what we're doing.
Almost nothing, there's almost no way to accommodate all iterations
Well,
of this stuff right here too.
Yeah, the WebEx audio just went down. That's what it is. It's
I
nothing.
am not a WebEx fan.
No.
I spent an hour and a half trying to get on one of those damn things the other day and drove me.
Can WebEx hear us in the room?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you on WebEx. Can we get a sound test from the room, please?
Yes, this is April from the room, and we can hear you in WebEx again. Thank you.
Very good. So from the technical point of view, we're ready to restart.
Matt, can we get a sound check from Ms. Johnson or Ms. Bogue, please?
Ms. Johnson, can you give us a five count, please?
Absolutely. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I'm not sure quite how to proceed.
We will return from a brief recess shortly. Give us 1 minute, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman.
Belrakis, I'm going to ask you to just begin from the top.
I didn't hear that last part.
Please,
But it,
Ms.
yeah, let's start from the top. I won't I'll just
So,
repeat
hold on,
the
guys,
question.
let me call the meeting back.
Okay. Okay.
The committee will come to order. Mr. Belrakis, I'm going to recognize you from the top, and you weren't here, but I want to congratulate you on the passage of your bill. So, you're welcome, sir. You're welcome, sir. And Mr. Levin as well. So, go ahead, proceed, Mr. Belrakis.
I think I'm just going to ask the question, and we'll go with the background a little later, but this is so very important. What specific measures, Dr. Johnson, has VA taken to implement to improve access and quality of maternity care provided to veterans through VA, and what actions are being taken to onboard and retain additional maternity care coordinators at facilities that may be in need? If you could please answer that question, because this is such an important issue for our constituents, please, particularly in my visit.
Absolutely. And I want to say thank you so much for your interest in this question. I hear you and I agree with you wholeheartedly that this is absolutely an important issue, particularly for our veteran population, who we know does have increased morbidity of many medical conditions, but particularly PTSD, military sexual and trauma, which absolutely can impact pregnancy. I will say that we 100% agree that maternity care coordination is absolutely essential. We've worked very hard to build the maternity care coordination position within VA. Of 143 sites, we have maternity care coordinators dedicated in 140, and we are actively looking to recruit additional maternity care coordinators in those sites where they don't exist. I will say where they don't exist, that position is being filled by staff who are doing it as a collateral duty, and typically their background is social work or nursing. I want to emphasize that our maternity care coordinator program is very broadly supported within VA, and we have specific resources available for everyone in that position to really allow them to work at the top of their game and support women veterans who are pregnant in every way possible for them. And that includes connecting those veterans, working as a clinical navigator, so connecting our veterans to care and resources in their local communities, but also within VA, particularly mental health services that VA really does excel in terms of PTSD and military sexual trauma, really getting those veterans connected to the care. Another piece that our maternity care coordinators do is necessary screenings, very important screenings for interpersonal violence, depression, PTSD, and sort of screen those pregnant veterans throughout the pregnancy so that they can be connected to the care that they may need. I hope I answered your question, and please let me know if you would like additional response. Thank you again so much for your interest.
I'd like to work with you on that. Ms. Underwood has a great bill that I've co-sponsored.
Mr. Billrockers, why don't you go and ask another question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go with the next question?
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask another question.
Okay, all right. Chairman Bogue, in the VA's testimony, it states that the department does not have the IT capability to pay schools the tuition and fees payment as laid out in H.R. 7111. A bill that I'm proud to co-sponsor with Dr. Rowe, as 50% when the veteran begins, 25% when they finish, when the veteran finishes, and 25% when the veteran gets a job. How is this possible when this is a very similar structure to the one put in place for the VET-TECH program, the VET-TECH program? And this question is for Chairman Bogue.
Charmaine, thank you for your question. Basically, in terms of the structure, when it comes to the IT infrastructure for the payment system for VET-TECH, the model is similar but different. In terms of the model for VET-TECH, it's 25% for tuition and fees when the student actually starts their program, 25% when they complete their program, and 50% when they finish their program. In this particular legislation, as it relates to this new retraining program, it's actually reversed when it comes to 50% of the tuition and fees paid up front, and then 25 and 25 for the remainder of the program. So basically, we need to be able to build in the rules in the system in order to calculate accordingly, so that those rules don't exist today. Beyond just the payment system itself, we need to develop the application process for students or individuals to apply. And then the other piece is we need to be able to build in the enrollment certification piece for schools to be able to certify underneath this new program. So it's not just the payment piece. There's multiple aspects that touch different IT systems within our space that would need to be modified in order to make this program, get this program up and running. And that's why we estimated with our IT partners that could potentially take up to 9 months to do so.
I think I'll move on to the next one. A follow-up, this bill also provides $30 million for each year of the VET-TECH program, since it has currently run out of money due to its incredible popularity. Do you believe this is the right amount, the $30 million, to help keep this pilot program going so we can see at the end it has, we want it to be successful, so we have to fund it. What is your opinion on that? Is this the right amount of money?
So additional $30 million, we believe that's on the right track to support the demand of the program. However, I just want to note that we are allocated $15 million each year to support the Vet Tech program. Last year, we actually had a carryover of $13 million because the program didn't start at the beginning of the FY, it started somewhere near the middle. So we carried over $13 million. So in addition to exhausting this year's funding of $15 million, we also exhausted the carryover money from last year of $13 million, which brings it to a total of $28 million. In the midst of the pandemic, the rise of unemployment, we saw a major surge in the number of applications coming in the door for this program. This program was already popular, and we saw an increase in demand for this program in the midst of COVID-19. So we just want to make sure that we account for any carryover funds in addition to the demand of how many students that we're able to support each year. So each year we'll probably be able to support around 2,000 students with that increase in funding, which is goodness all around for our student veterans.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Mr.
the extra
Locke.
time.
I apologize for our technical issues. Mr. Lamb, you're recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really have one main question, which I think is for you, Ms. Murphy. I know that the VA is supporting the bill to expand the evaluations for disability to, I guess, non-physician healthcare providers outside of the VA. And I understand the logic of wanting more flexibility, especially at this time, to clear the backlog. What's not clear to me from the legislation or surrounding materials are exactly what safeguards are going to be in place to make sure the veteran gets the exact same quality examination, since they're going to be living with the consequences of it for a long time in the form of their rating and that kind of thing. So can you explain to us how you're going to hold these people accountable and exactly what sort of standards you're going to hold them to?
Certainly. We've expanded and matured this program over the past 4 years since VBA took on responsibility for all contract exams that VA does. We've increased our staffing, right-sized that program office, greatly increased and enhanced our quality review team. We have supporting contracts that check licensure of folks who are doing the exams, check the invoices. We've had, unfortunately, 2 situations where we had vendors that were struggling to perform, and we swiftly and effectively took action there. If a vendor does not perform an adequate examination, we have mechanisms in place that we send it back to them. They have to correct it with no additional payment. We have multiple oversight mechanisms in place to make sure that they are doing good work and have appropriate training, quality feedback. So it is a very complex program office that supports this part of our mission.
Okay. Have you noticed a larger trend of errors or mistakes or needs to be sent back among contractors in the past couple of years? I mean, it seems like you've had to beef up the oversight quite a lot. Do you notice that contractors sometimes get it wrong more often?
I wouldn't agree with that statement, sir. These are complex examinations, particularly some of the specialty exams. Audio comes to mind. Some of the multi-system examinations that the contractors do. We've seen good quality from the contractors as we did with VHA. So I would say they're on par. And also, we just have a better system and an improving system in place with ability to go to site visits. We do drop-ins we did before COVID, to do drop-ins on clinics, to do on-site eyes looking at the situation, the environment that the veteran is being examined in, who's doing the work, visit the primary vendors every year. So no, we haven't seen a problem there.
Okay, thank you. Just know that we're paying careful attention to this, and long term, I think many of us on the committee hope that VHA can still play a very healthy role in these evaluations, and I understand the need for flexibility at the moment, but I don't think it should replace the existing system that we've had. Thank you.
Yes, sir. It's very important to us and to our veterans. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. General Bergman, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Remember to pause for a couple of seconds before you speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lorente, Representative Buddy Carter's bill before us today, H.R. 3228, the VA Mission Telehealth Clarification Act, would authorize telehealth across state lines for health professional trainees under the clinical supervision of a VA healthcare professional. I understand that by including these trainees, this will increase the amount of professionals that VA can get on the line with veterans in the community. As VA expands its telehealth footprint in the wake of the pandemic, what additional flexibilities will be needed to accommodate this growth and to make this growth, if you will, kind of ongoing as we get better at implementing telehealth into our healthcare system across the spectrum? But first of all, let's get it right with the veterans.
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman. Part of the technical assistance and work in conjunction with the committee that we'd like to undertake on this bill is precisely to address that issue. We currently have VA healthcare providers who are not trainees, but they're also not licensed, certified, or registered by a state. And under the current language of the bill, those providers wouldn't be able to offer telehealth services. And so that's specifically why we would like to work with you to be able to expand the language. I can give you two very quick examples of the kinds of providers I'm talking about. When a psychologist or a social worker graduates from their training, they complete their schoolwork, their training, they still have to do a certain amount of time of clinical work, and then they're expected to take and pass licensing examinations. There's a time limit, and so right now we hire those individuals. They work under the supervision of a licensed psychologist or a licensed social worker, but the way the bill is currently worded, they wouldn't be able to offer the telehealth services. They could offer face-to-face.
Yeah, let me, I know time is flying here. What we've seen in our district, because it's a lot of rural and remote veteran population, the acceptance, first of all, the initial hesitance by the veterans to go, no, I want to go see a doctor was there. Now that they've seen how the telehealth can work and knowing that there have been restrictions on the travel, our veterans, again, in my district, have said, yes, this is working. I guess what I look at as the role of Congress, does the VA need more or less from this committee to help you get telehealth moving forward? Because it's one thing for us to try to be prescriptive and you as the practitioners to say, no, we, thank you very much. Thank you for all your input, but here's our plan and here's what we're doing. All we want to be able to know, especially as members of this committee, is to know how you're doing and where, if any, additional help you need from us, because part of our job is to communicate with our constituents, the veterans, and all that to show what's out there and what capabilities they have. So I just want to, also to you guys, just in, as VA is, different subject, VA is supportive of H.R. 4908, the Native American PACT Act, which seeks to end copays for Native American veterans. Has VA identified any other areas where it does not have parity with the Indian Health Services, in practice?
I don't know the answer to that question, sir, but I'm more than happy to take it for the record and get a response back to you.
Okay, and again, I'll just make kind of a capstone statement on my 5 minutes here to stay within the time. We have 8 tribes in my district, and I've had a chance to see all of their health clinics. And with space available, capabilities available, to me, if we are not, whether it be VA working with Indian Health System, to leverage the capabilities, everything from in-person to telehealth capabilities, then we're missing an opportunity to deliver the kind of health care that all of our citizens know they want, they need, and they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, General Bergman. I now call on Mr. Levin for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Llorente, I was quite disappointed to read your testimony on H.R. 4526, the Bryan Talley VA Employment Transparency Act, and I'd like to ask some questions specifically about VA's rationale for opposing what I believe is a common sense piece of legislation, and that starts with the employment status provision. You noted in your testimony that VA already has a policy in place to inform a claimant when a contractor's actions may be responsible for a wrongful act. So my question for you is, are there any policies in place to ensure that this information is communicated before the statute of limitation expires?
Thank you, Mr. Levin. I'm going to ask Ms. Yuri Walker to respond to your question from Risk Management.
Thank you. Quickly, because we only have 5 minutes. Is she on? Mr. Chairman, we want to hit the pause button here. It's her request. Who did you want again?
Ms. Yuri Walker.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman.
You'll get your time back. Do we have?
What?
Ms. Walker, can you unmute and identify yourself to make sure we can hear you?
Yes, this is your.
Try again. Your sound quality was not great there.
This is Yuri Walker.
Okay. I think if you have two devices, it sounds like it's echoing for us. Maybe you could mute one of them. While you're doing that, if Mr. Levin could just restate his question.
Sure thing.
So we all know what she's responding to.
I'm talking again about the Bryan Talley VA Employment Transparency Act, and again, VA noted that they already have a policy in place to inform a claimant when a contractor's actions may be responsible for a wrongful act. So my question was, are there any policies in place to ensure that this information is communicated to the veteran before the statute of limitation expires?
And Ms. Walker, if you could please address that question.
Yes, this is Yuri Walker.
We think you have two devices, ma'am, and that's why we're hearing this echo. Do you have like a phone or something nearby that you can turn off?
I have to dial in on my phone, but I do have my computer muted.
Okay. Why don't you just put yourself on mute again, ma'am? And why don't we return for us? We can always take it for the record, but we should ask again. I know, Dr. Llorente, that you felt Ms. Walker was more appropriate to answer it. Can you address that question, or?
No, sir, I really cannot.
Okay, we'll take that one for the record then.
Thank you, sir.
So the answer is no. Veterans are not provided the information before the statute of limitations expired, and you know that, and it's fine that you want risk management to answer that for you. But it appears to be VA's position that it's acceptable for veterans to be denied legal recourse because VA did not provide them the necessary information in a timely manner. Perhaps your risk management person would like to respond to that? Mr. Chairman, I think we're still having trouble here.
Who did you call on? I'm sorry.
The same risk management person?
Ms. Yuri Walker.
Well,
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
I think it's clear at this point we're not going to be able to get solid audio out of her for the meantime. So if you have questions for her, we can certainly submit them and ask for them in the record, but
So
just ask you to address another witness.
It's fair to assume that the answer is no. There are no policies in place to ensure that the information is communicated to the veteran before the statute of limitation expires. And look, I believe that everyone here in this room, everyone at VA cares very deeply about our veterans, but your concern for our veterans is simply not being reflected in your position on this legislation. Shifting to another provision, which you may need risk management for that as well, the legal counsel provision. You purported in your testimony that it is not in the claimant's best interest to retain legal counsel due to legal costs, and that the absence of legal counsel does not disadvantage veterans. That's simply not true. In most matters, VA is on the veteran's side, has the veteran's best interests in mind, but when it comes to these sorts of claims, as Mr. Talley can tell you, VA is unable to provide an unbiased opinion on what is in the veteran's best interest because it directly contradicts the department's own best interest. So with all due respect, your position on this legislation, in addition to being disappointing, is also deeply and inherently conflicted. Regarding the statute of limitations provision, your testimony argued that it would be onerous for VA to maintain each state's varying statutes of limitation for personal injury, property damage, wrongful death, etc. You also reasoned that it would not be helpful for claimants to receive this information when it is necessary for their claim. So here's my question, and I hope that you might be able to address this one. Your testimony says it's too difficult for the VA, a federal agency, with a budget over $200 billion a year, to keep track of this information, statutes of limitation, et cetera, in different states. What makes you think it's easier for a veteran to keep track of this information, for somebody like Bryan Talley to keep track of this information, especially without legal counsel?
What I can respond in terms of your question, sir, is that I think there is agreement that this is a very complex situation. It is very difficult to keep track of the changes in legislation. I think we are in agreement with respect to that statement. Unfortunately, I'm just not in the best position to be able to answer to the degree of detail that I believe you deserve. And I'd like to be able to respond accurately. And that's the reason why I'd like to take your question for the record so that we can respond accordingly.
Well, I'd like that too, and I'm sure Mr. Meadows, who isn't here anymore but now works in a different building, I'm sure he'd like the answers to those questions as well. Lastly, you stated it wouldn't be feasible to provide these notices within 30 days because claims may take months to reach the Office of General Counsel if they're presented to a different office. Makes no sense. Why doesn't VA train all of its employees to promptly redirect these sorts of claims to the Office of General Counsel?
And again, sir, I can't answer that question, but I'm happy to take it for the record.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll have to yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Levin, and if we are able to get Ms. Walker in on the telephone line as opposed to the video, we may have time to come back to you later. And with that, we recognize Mr. Boss for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Ms. Murphy, I'm going to kind of lighten this up a little bit. Can you kind of just elaborate on HR 7287, what, if this is passed, what we could see as far as shorter wait times and faster disability exams and completion of times for veterans?
Yeah, yes, sir. This would be a great help for us because we've had that flexibility with the physicians, which was the original language of the legislation, by expanding to the other well-trained, qualified practitioners who do some of this work, this contract exam work for us. The physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, audiologists, and psychologists, very important piece of this. It enables them to move around and be redeployed by these contractors. I think you gave the example earlier about being able to use the capacity in their systems and move the personnel around where the need is, and that's exactly what this would do.
And it also helps in rural areas as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Also, you know, the question was asked a while ago, and I'm just wanting to, this is not on my original list of questions, but the statement was made, you would like to see it in other areas. Can you tell us what other licensure groups might be out there that were not included, and so what we're looking at?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite
Okay,
understanding your question.
when I thought when talking on this, that you thought these 4 were good that we have listed, but there are other licensures out there that provide exams. What would those licensures be? Do we know all the different?
Sir, at this time, I think this
This is sufficient?
captures
Okay.
what we're looking
Okay.
for. And, you know, to the earlier point about telehealth, these practitioners also do that to the extent that the exam supports it. And that has been a big lift for us during this COVID-19 period. Just this last week, we've been able to do almost 22,000 exams in person, but more also with telehealth capability that these folks also support.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Boss. Now recognize Mr. Pappas for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panel. Yesterday, I introduced the burial equity bill for members of the Guard and Reserve. It's a bipartisan, bicameral bill. The idea came to me from our state Guard and veteran community. Yesterday, I was on the phone with the director of our state veteran cemetery, who said he has a few dozen members of the Guard and Reserve who are on a list waiting for indication of whether or not they can be buried at his facility, which is hallowed ground in our state. And he asked me, who could possibly oppose a concept like this? Well, I guess my answer to him is the VA opposes this idea, and I was really disappointed and shocked to see the language in the statement that VA submitted here today on this bill. In the last sentence, you wrote, to expand burial eligibility for reservists and National Guard would diminish the distinct honor of those veterans and service members who have earned a similar burial benefit in VA cemeteries. Diminish the distinct honor. As I said earlier, I work closely with the veteran and Guard leaders in my state in developing this legislation, and frankly, I believe that they should be able to decide which individuals are able to be buried and laid to rest in their facility and not VA. One leader in my state, Cy Mafuz in Nashua, served as an Army reservist in 1970 to 76 during a really tough time in American history. He told me he remembers being harassed by regular Army personnel for being, quote, a shake and bake soldier, and he did his best to brush off the stigma and focus on being a drill sergeant to prepare young men going overseas to serve in Vietnam. He remembers when he visited New Hampshire's Veterans Cemetery in Boscawen that he wanted to add his name to the list for permission to be buried there, but was told he didn't qualify because he didn't have enough active duty time and was not considered a veteran. He said he was crushed, embarrassed when he was told he was not a veteran. I know, in fact, that if I were called to duty, I would have given my life to defend this country. My grandfathers, like so many others, came to this country willing to die and defend its honor. He said, as a reservist, I was not told to think and act differently because I was a reservist. I was not told to do my job differently because I was a reservist. I was proud to serve and was willing to give my life if needed. But because I was not called to active duty, I'm not considered a, quote, veteran. And when will the disrespect for my service stop? When can I start to feel that my time served was an important difference that I made? Another veteran who asked not to be named served 8 years in the New Hampshire National Guard, and while they were never activated, their unit did 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many of their friends they served with in that unit were on these deployments. And they said, quote, when a citizen enlists or commissions into the military, they take the same oath to defend our Constitution regardless of their branch. One serves regardless of the potential risks to life and limb. This is the same for all branches, active or reserve. A reservist has little or no control over being deployed to active duty. In many cases, their training involves great risk, great sacrifices that are made over many years involving careers and families with only a fraction of the benefits available to active duty personnel. So I'm wondering if you can tell me how giving burial rights to these 2 individuals would diminish the honor of other veterans who are buried in our veteran cemeteries across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. I'm going to ask Mr. Powers to respond to your question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas, for the questions, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. We greatly appreciate everything the committee does in supporting our Veteran Cemetery Grant Program, which supports the Veteran Cemetery in New Hampshire. As you mentioned, the proposed legislation is inconsistent with our longstanding policy that grant-funded cemeteries be operated solely for interment of veterans and members of their families. That policy is found in the federal regulations, Part 39 of Chapter 38. We mean no disrespect for the service of National Guardsmen and reservists. Certainly, they take an oath. They serve their country. Lately they have, in many cases, served their state and their country as well. However, there is a distinction. The program was set up, the Veteran Cemetery Grant Program was set up to complement the national cemeteries, to be consistent between who's eligible for burial in a national cemetery and who's eligible for burial in a state cemetery such as the one in New Hampshire. There are distinctions, and we don't want to create those disparities.
Well, I think the statement does not do justice to the service of these individuals, and this idea was brought to me by our military and veteran community. They support this, and I think our state veteran cemeteries should have the ability, without penalty of losing these valuable grants, to determine if these individuals can be laid to rest in a fitting manner. I thank you for your comments, but I vehemently disagree with them, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. I recognize Mr. Barr for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you all for your presence here today, and appreciate your service with the VA. I am disappointed, obviously, that the VA is taking a position against what I think is not only common sense legislation, but legislation that has been brought to us by veterans, for veterans, that are unnecessarily being denied the assistance that they need to access the disability compensation system. And as I said in my opening statement, I have a constituent, Denny Hart, Chief Warrant Officer, U.S. Army, volunteers his time. He's dedicated to his fellow veteran. That's how he deals with his own issues as he works with these other veterans. He's not a scammer. He's not in any way preying on any of these other veterans. He's helping other veterans. And I don't understand why the VA would take the position, Dr. Lorente, that we should deny veterans who have legitimate disability claims, deny them the benefit of a fellow veteran who is acting in good faith and on their behalf, volunteering to help them, and he has some level of expertise in understanding the process, helping them. And by denying him the ability to access these DBQs and help these other veterans, these veterans are not getting the disability benefits to which they are entitled. So can you speak to this and why you wouldn't be open to accommodating someone like Denny Hart helping other veterans in Central Kentucky by denying them access to a DBQ?
So thank you, Mr. Barr. I'm going to ask Ms. Murphy to respond to your questions.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Ms. Murphy.
Good afternoon. It's critical to
Can,
I think
can
you
you
need
make sure your microphone's
You're
on,
right.
ma'am?
Thank you. It's critical to have the support of folks, as you described, to help our veterans file their claims, understand the process, and we have that great support by veteran service organizations, attorneys, a lot of veteran advocates. We couldn't do it without them.
Right.
But the piece here that we're focused on is the ability to have the outward-facing, public-facing
Right.
disability benefit questionnaires so that they can take them to their doctors. We've talked earlier about that good data drives good policy, and we have engaged in that recently in the very critical decision to discontinue making these available.
Well, how can you guarantee that veterans, especially in rural areas, and I represent a number of rural areas there, how can you guarantee that they would have equal access to providers in the contract examination program as they would to their own medical provider?
So, sir, the bill we spoke of earlier from Mr. Bost with that flexibility, that will help. Also, we already have multiple processes in place. We have a private medical record retrieval contract that within less than 2 weeks, if you say, here are my doctor has private treatment records that would be relevant, we will go get those for you. If you need an exam, it's part of our duty to assist to provide that exam. And we have expanded this contract exam program significantly to have that saturation. And I will say, these DBQs were originally created. I helped champion this initiative to solve a problem that we had overseas, where there was no footprint from VA.
Yeah.
Now we have 33 countries covered by this contract.
Well, we're still not getting, I mean, the Office of Inspector General issued a report after it received a hotline tip that a contracted disability medical exam provider in California did not have the capacity to complete scheduled exams, and that VBA staff were canceling these exams and rescheduling them through other contractors. A canceled exam can result in adverse decision on veterans' claims, to delay veterans' benefits, and result in additional costs. We're just giving you additional manpower here with this idea. I don't have much time left, but I want to address the other issue that my legislation attempts to address, and this is this just this unfortunate situation where because you have an updated DBQ form, the veteran can't rely on a previously filled out form. And it's caused a whole lot of frustration, as you can imagine, when they go through all the work to submit the DBQ, and because of some just arbitrary bureaucratic update to the form, all of that work is down the drain and they have to start from scratch. I had one veteran, a constituent, who literally quit the process. He was eligible for the disability benefits, but because of the frustration of having to refill out these forms over and over again, that just doesn't make sense. That's a bureaucratic impediment to getting these veterans the benefits they deserve. So I do want you all to consider that, whether you support the legislation or not. We need flexibility, and these veterans need to be able to rely on the forms when they fill it out. So well, with that, I'm out of time, but I thank you for your service and your consideration of my arguments here, and I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Recognize Ms. Loria for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. Mr. Barr, I was about to follow up with the same line of questioning as you, so I'd like to offer to yield back to you if you'd like to continue or seek an answer from Ms. Murphy on your last comments.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Luria, and I will yield to Ms. Murphy just to respond to that topic.
Yeah, sir. So the primary reason we're updating these disability benefit questionnaires is because we're updating all 15 body systems in our rating schedule for the first time since 1945. This is long overdue, and it's necessary to improve the policy and to recognize improvements in medicine, technology, science, and modernize the rating schedule. So these are necessary updates. You mentioned the IG report. They told us that we needed to take a look at this because of the predatory practices, the almost 500 referrals with concern about abusive business practices, potential fraud on these veterans. So we really
I share that concern, by the way,
Yeah.
and I accept what you're saying totally. We don't want these veterans to be subject to those kinds of practices. But why can't you just go after them, focus on them? Don't exclude veteran volunteers like Denny Hart. I mean, roll up the sleeves and do the work and root out all the bad actors, but keep the good actors in place who are actually helping our veterans. And I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I appreciate that. I'll yield back.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to follow that same line. I mean, in your testimony, you do suggest that there are other ways to go after the bad actors, potentially using technology and software systems that would allow other authorized providers access to these forms. But the truth is, even as a veteran who needs to go have this exam, seeing the form, understanding what the criteria are and what information is required into the form is necessary information. And I feel like it's being locked away in some sort of secret vault and only certain people can have it and share it with the veteran. Don't you think the veteran deserves to see the DBQ before they consider having an examination for a follow-on claim?
It could be helpful, but not necessary. Again, it's our duty to assist to provide the exam, and we're doing that through our VHA partners and our contracting partners. The information is contained in the rating schedule in Part 4 of 38 CFR if someone wanted to take a look at it. I will say that we have the data historically that shows that only 1.6% of claims we receive have a public use DBQ associated, and only 4% have been submitted by a treating physician. So these are being provided by people who aren't
So is that
seeing these
4% per year?
overall.
overall. So you can't give me 4% of a number. I mean, that would be thousands of veterans over all time. Is that correct?
Well, I believe it was a sampling we took of those received. So 1.6% of the, of the total, all of the process, building in a mechanism so that we can go after these folks that we don't have. We've asked IG to assist us with this. They've been unsuccessful in shutting this down, building an IT system for a very small percentage. We believe that it's good stewardship to use those resources in a way that we can more directly fulfill our duty to assist rather than go this other route.
And that seems like a sudden change, though, in direction, because these forms were available, and then all of a sudden they weren't available. So can you explain what took place that you withdrew them from the public?
I'd be happy to. We, as I said, we've made many referrals to IG. We took a look at the data to make these data-driven policy decisions. We had several, at least 3 or 4 collaborative sessions with the primary VSOs, led by our principal deputy undersecretary, to talk through the issues, the concerns, what solutions there could be. And while I acknowledge that some folks might not agree with this, this is good policy being driven by the data and taking care of veterans and good stewardship. That's what you entrust us to do. And Congress has also given us the solution that we didn't have when we started with these DBQs, which was to reach veterans overseas and in rural areas where we had no solution. This contract authority that Congress has provided has obviated the need for those private-facing DBQs.
Well, thank you. Thanks for your response. I yield back.
Recognize Mr. Muser for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here with us, and thanks for your service to our veterans. I'd like to start with Deputy Undersecretary Glenn Powers. Does the Veterans Administration believe that H.R. 6039 should include a requirement that the City of Vallejo provide VA funding to maintain and operate the cemetery there?
Obviously, we've been clear that we don't support the legislation. And certainly, we would need resources if somebody said this is now a cemetery that you need to operate. The City of Vallejo took responsibility for that cemetery in 1996. The ranking members already mentioned how much neglect has occurred to that cemetery. That doesn't necessarily mean then that the Department of Veterans Affairs should take it over. We have, as I think the ranking member also mentioned, and it's in our testimony, there are probably 18 million veterans interred throughout the nation. That there could be a unexpected consequence that we could be expected to take care of their graves as well, just because they fall into neglect. And we know there are communities out there that don't let those cemeteries fall into neglect. And that's what the City of Vallejo should not have done. We've supported them. We have worked with the Navy, in fact, to build that IRT program where the Army units have gone in there and have made fixes. Unfortunately, because of COVID, they've lost a little momentum, but they have told us they're going back. So that's what we want to see. We want to see that result. And we've seen good results from the IRT program.
Yeah. How much would it cost the VA to maintain and operate at the Mare Island Cemetery for 10 years at the same standards as other NCA cemeteries?
Unfortunately, we have not had the opportunity yet. We've talked about it a lot because we've been talking about this for 3 years in response to those who advocate that we take over the cemetery. So we are now saying we would need to give a better estimate. We have looked at it roughly. We have said between 1.4 and 3.1 million for estimated repairs. And an unknown potential because there's big sinkhole issues that may have been exacerbated by some activities that the city took on the surrounding land. So we would need more time to do that analysis.
Okay, if you could look at that and do your best to give an estimate, a 10-year estimate, or to bring it up to quality levels, and then with the maintenance fees would be over the following years.
We'd be happy to work on that. And one more thing, that's, another reason that we do not feel that we should take over this cemetery. It doesn't support, our establishment policy for increasing service to veterans to offer them burials in other areas. It in fact will take resources away, and this committee supports us by giving those resources so we could expand burial access to veterans. This cemetery is not going to do that, and so therefore we're using resources for the wrong reasons.
Okay, well, we'll continue that discussion, I'm sure. Dr. Lorente, my limited time left, I want to ask you regarding veteran job loss and skills development and retraining. Does the VA have a pretty good understanding of the jobs that were in fact lost due to Corona, categories, for instance, as well as what the opportunities that exist today, whether or not those same jobs are even there for our veterans who became unemployed? And are we working on a skills initiative, communication with them to match to what those opportunities might be? And are we gaining those opportunities from perhaps, and Ms. Murphy, if this would be better for you, to the businesses in the area? Do we have a holistic effort of database, using technology, whatever we have to do to provide for them? And I guess I'm concluding a lot of questions in one. Will HR 7111 assist in this effort?
So I think I'd like to first ask Ms. Bogue to address that question in the context of the legislation, HR 7111.
That's great. But you know what, Ms. Bogue, I am out of time, so if it's at all possible, maybe you could just submit us a memo on it afterwards. All right. Thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, we can submit additional information to your office on this matter.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bogue, and recognize Mr. Cisneros for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our panel for being here today. Dr. Lorente, regarding the Veterans Affairs Freedom of Information Act Reform Act, in your testimony you indicate that the mandate to reduce the FOIA backlog by 75% within 3 years has the potential to create additional issues for FOIA processing in VA. Will you elaborate on that?
Yes, sir, I would be very happy to. Many of the requests that the VA receives are very complex requests. Sometimes they span years. Sometimes there are requests for both electronic and paper documents. And part of what happens is, because of our very unique mission, we must ensure that patient health information is kept secure and private information is also kept private. So in addition to being able to gather the documents, we often have to have our staff conduct line-by-line analysis in order to be able to assure the privacy of the information. As you can imagine, that can be very, very time-consuming. Part of the concern with respect to the 75% over a 3-year window is we're concerned that it might shift the focus and the attention towards the reduction at the expense of the security. And that's our concern. We very strongly agree with the intent of this bill. We take our FOIA responsibilities very seriously, and we want to reduce the backlog. It's the extent of this backlog that is of concern.
Dr. Lorente, with all due respect, the information I have, some of the unfilled VA FOIA requests, they date back to 2011. I mean, this is going on 9 years. I mean, is that a suitable time frame to be getting these things done? Why is the process taking so long?
I'm not familiar with that particular case, sir, and if you would provide us with any information, I'm more than happy to take it back to the FOIA office and look into it further in order to be able to address the issue. I agree with you that we want to be able, and we strive to address the FOIA request within 20 days. And that is most certainly our goal. We are not always able to achieve that goal.
So is there a mandated time frame that the VA would agree to? I mean, would 5 years be better?
That's a very good question, and I'm happy to take it back to the FOIA office and to our officers to see if that would be more feasible. I don't know the answer to that question, but happy to take it, sir.
So why would there be cases, well, why are there cases that are taking longer, than others? You want to get it done in 20 days. I mean, why can't that be done for every case? And I understand you said you got to go line item by line item, but I mean, how big is the staff that's taking care of these FOIA requests?
So conducting a root cause analysis of the backlog is an extremely important aspect of being able to really address the question that you're asking. I can give you generalities, but you're right. Being able to get at the heart of the matter in terms of the ones that take a long time is extremely important. In some cases, we also have to work through multiple offices or different facilities. So it also becomes a question of gathering the information from multiple different locations. When the system was set up, it's my understanding that it's somewhat decentralized, and that adds another layer, especially if there are requests that are being sought from multiple different offices and from multiple different areas of or administrations in the system.
So what changes do we need to make then in order to speed up this process? You're saying, do we need to centralize these requests and centralize this information so that it can be gathered and be done a lot quicker?
I think that there are multiple different potential solutions to work on the backlog. And what I think I feel comfortable saying is that we really would like to work with the committee in order to be able to identify more specifically what some of those initiatives are. I know that one of the intents is to be able to see what we might be able to do from an electronic perspective. Some of the programs are not as good as we would like them to be, but there are some additional programming perhaps in the future. But there are multiple different things that our FOIA offices have in mind, and we really would welcome working with the committee to be able to address them.
So I'm out of time. I just want to say we want to work with the VA to get this done. Our service members, our veterans are asking for this information. We got to make sure that we get it to them. With that, I yield back.
And recognize Mr. Roy for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, thank the witnesses for your patience and making it through this couple of 3 hours, I guess, we're on to, but hopefully we'll be out of here in a moment and voting. I'm going to speak just for a minute about H.R. 6082, the Forgotten Vietnam Veterans Act. Proud to co-sponsor that with my Democrat colleague, T.J. Cox, and thank him for his leadership on that. Obviously, he's not here. And, I don't need to get too much in the details. Obviously, I think the VA has stated a position in saying that it's not necessary to make the change. Obviously, I disagree, or I wouldn't have co-sponsored the legislation. And the point that I would make is that, look, the U.S. started operations with 3,000 officers and enlisted men in the Republic of Vietnam as early as November 1st, 1955. As you all know, DOD recognizes the Vietnam War as November 1, 55 to May 14th, 75. Y'all recognize it from February 28th, 61 to May 7th, 75. That discrepancy obviously leaves some folks kind of in the lurch in terms of some of the benefits that they might otherwise receive. By the count that I've got from CRS and other estimates, it's about 3,250 individuals that would qualify, and a number of those, and that doesn't include some of those that have already passed away. I am understanding that this is the only wartime era where the DOD exceeds the VA time frame. That's what I'm told. Does the VA agree with that statement? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, sir. I'm not aware.
I would like to have that answer if that's possible. If that's VA's position, I'd like to know the answer. But that's what I'm under the understanding, that this is the only one that's the case. There's a score to this. CBO scored it at $10 million. I'm fiscal conservative, always looking for offsets. Those are all fine, but I think this is really important, and this is one of those issues that we ought to honor those who served, and keeping in mind that what the advisors went through and that was a real issue. I would tell you that I've talked to some veterans in my district who have been impacted by this. Here's a gentleman who's not in my district, but Wayne McGaughy is the leader of the Early Vietnam Veterans Group, the organization. And I'll skip over some of the stuff, but here's the salient details. He said the situation in Vietnam in those years between the defeat of the French in '55 and the introduction of large-scale U.S. military units in 1961 was dangerous, dirty, and secretive. Major attacks on U.S. and South Vietnamese forces in 1957, 59, and 60 resulted in approximately 25 U.S. military being killed or wounded, including myself, speaking in his words. This has caused the strange situation where these U.S. casualties receive the Purple Heart but cannot receive VA wartime benefits. In 1960 alone, about 2,200 South Vietnamese soldiers were killed, and approximately 3,000 village chiefs were assassinated by the communists. It was dangerous indeed to those United States personnel guiding the South Vietnamese forces. By the Geneva Accords, we were limited to only 342 U.S. military personnel. In addition to being denied needed benefits in their twilight years, our early Vietnam veterans feel they have been denied the measure of respect due to those who put their lives on the line and what they were doing during that time. It would seem to me that particularly if it's true that this is a particularly unique group, and I understand some of the arguments, right, and some of the arguments, going back to some other conflicts that may or may not be designated as wartime, and I understand those questions. This is a little different, though, and I think this is the perspective here in terms of the way DOD defines it is important, and we frankly probably ought to have a conversation about some of those other conflicts. I'll make one other observation on this. I joined with some of my Democratic colleagues in January. There's 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and an independent writing a letter about our authorization of force and the fact that we are now 20 years into authorizations of force, and we now have men and women in uniform who are enlisting to serve who weren't even alive when we passed those authorizations of force. And I think when we think about the impact of veterans and we think about what that means, we ought to be considering the whole nature of conflict and what war looks like. I would implore the VA to reconsider their position on this, and I'd certainly, regardless of the VA's position, implore my colleagues to get behind this measure to make sure that these veterans who honorably served during a time that the Department of Defense recognizes was war, that we're making sure that they're receiving that recognition and the benefits due to this small and dwindling, unfortunately due to time, group of individuals. I respect your all's taking your time to be here. Thanks for doing so and taking some tough questions from some of the folks here in the committee.
Sir, I would just point out, I agree, and I hear your passion. I know that this would expand eligibility for pension benefits to the folks you mentioned. But if somebody was injured on active duty, our service-connected benefits are available to them. If there was a death or a chronic injury during service, that's what service connection is for, and we are able to provide those benefits if somebody developed an illness or had an injury. So we would have already done that for someone who.
I know my time is up. I would only just mention that there are other benefits they do not receive. Do you agree? Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Roy, and I would like to thank our first panel. You are now excused. I'm going to go immediately to recognizing and introducing the witnesses we have on our second panel. We have with us Patricia Jackson Kelly, the National President of the National Association of Black Military Women. We have Katie Purswell, the Deputy Director, Health Policy of the American Legion. We have Mr. Kevin Alice, CEO, National Congress of American Indians. And we have Lindsay Church, Executive Director, Minority Veterans of America. I will remind each of our witnesses on the second panel, please pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that the recording can capture all of your words. And remember to do that same thing when you're answering the members' questions. It's not always obvious when you're on the other end outside of our hearing room, but that 2 to 3 second pause after someone asks you a question is very important. Your written statements in full will be included in the hearing record. Thank you very much. And now, Ms. Jackson Kelly, you are recognized for 5 minutes. And we're not hearing anything in the hearing room, so you may need to unmute your computer.
Hello, can you hear me?
We're starting to hear you now. Still a little bit broken up. Why don't you try to take it from the top?
Good morning, Chairman Tocano, Ranking Member Rowe, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views on this legislative hearing. The National Association of Black Military Women was founded in July 1976 by a group of 21 Black women who served in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps and the Women's Army Corps during World War II, Korean, and Vietnam Wars. Since the initial convening, NABMW has established a growing network of thousands of Black military women across the nation. Before delving in the matter before the committee today, I would like to highlight that this is the first time that the NABMW has appeared before the committee to testify. NABMW is pleased to offer our views on the bill, and I hope the committee continues to amplify the voices of Black women veterans in future oversight and legislative hearings during the 116th Congress and beyond. National Association of Black Military Women support HR 6039, HR 6082, and HR 4908, HR 4256, and HR 3582, which would allow the VA to expand the scope of the advisory committee on minority veterans by including gay, bisexual, and transgender veterans. NABMW strongly support HR 96, to furnish dental care in the same manner as any other medical service. NABMW strongly support HR 4281, expanding contraceptive care for women. And NABMW oppose HR 3010 as far back as Secretary Shuskin's tenure. It has been requested to change the motto. This quote clearly excludes women. The National Association of Black Military Women strongly support HR 6141, which improves maternal care and identify maternal mortality and morbidity. We strongly oppose HR 2791, the Department of Veterans Affairs Tribal Advisory Committee Act of 2017. The National Association of Black Military Women feel that this legislation would direct the Department of Veterans Affairs to establish the advisory committee on tribal and Indian affairs to advise the VA on matters related to Native American tribes. The VA currently has a Center for Minority Veterans, which performs oversight for minority veteran issues and serves as a principal advisor to the Secretary of the VA. After having served on the National Center for Minority Veteran Advisory Committee, establishing a separate advisory board to function as an oversight accountability measure will duplicate its efforts. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement on the agenda item. However, I will be remiss if I do not acknowledge the historical 6 AAA postal units who served during World War II, Gold Medal Act of 2019. It is not the jurisdiction of this committee. However, I am requesting that you encourage your colleagues to move this bill that has been sitting in the House. Also, Specialist Vanessa Gilman. This matter is squarely the jurisdiction of HASC. However, I am appealing to you to render oversight. Women of color in the service receive inadequate investigation follow-up. It is indeed true. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We can work together to accomplish this mission. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you or members of the committee may have.
Thank you. Now recognize Ms. Perswell for 5 minutes.
On January 1st, 2019, a newly medically retired soldier with her 2 young children moved across the country, leaving her husband behind to complete his own medical retirement process. She began setting up a home for her family. She bought a house, started a master's degree program, and enrolled her kids in school. To everyone around her, she seemed like she was thriving, but in reality, she was drowning. 8 months later, and in desperate need of medical health care appointment, she called her primary care physician to get her mental health intake appointment moved up. She was told again, for what may have been the 6th time, there were no doctors available. She was told again, everyone waits, call the crisis line if you need. No one should have to hear those words. No one should have to wait that long for care. This is my story. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of our National Commander, Bill Oxford, and our nearly 2 million members, we thank you for inviting the American Legion to testify today. As you know, the American Legion dedicates its time and resources to serve America's veterans and their families. Our mission has never been more clear than during this time of pandemic and uncertainty over how our country will recover. As such, local American Legion posts are working overtime to help our veteran families. Legionnaires have collected food, hygiene, and cleaning supplies. They've prepared and delivered food, held blood drives, and made face masks. Our national commander's call for buddy checks have increased to our members to ensure we are meeting the needs of our veterans. We have held financial workshops, resume writing seminars, virtual career fairs, town halls, and networking meetups. Ladies and gentlemen, the American Legion will continue to serve our veteran population and others because that is who we are and that is what we do. But we need Congress to meet us halfway by providing sound legislation that supports our veterans. Legislation like H.R. 3228, which affords veterans, like me, the ability to see a healthcare provider more quickly through telehealth by allowing veterans to be seen by a larger portion of VA. This bill also offers those still in training the ability to become proficient in a new type of medicine, a skill they will no doubt need in order to continue to serve our veterans. Not only has the age of COVID-19 created a health crisis, it has also forced unemployment and reduced income upon many of our veterans. We feel that H.R. 7111 will help bring down the unemployment rate of veterans who have lost their jobs and critical income due to COVID-19. The current unemployment rate for veterans has more than doubled in the last year. With nearly 17,000 service members leaving active duty service every month, these numbers will not fall anytime soon. If done correctly, the Economic Recovery Act will help veterans, young and old, transition into new jobs. As we consider employment issues that affect our veterans community, we also need to recognize that members of our National Guard are affected by those same issues. National Guard soldiers are helping first responders battle the pandemic through security operations, testing veterans for COVID-19, and helping deal with the threat. They are constantly being mobilized and demobilized, which takes them away from their steady occupations. At one point in June, nearly 1/4 of our entire National Guard, 120,000 soldiers, were mobilized in our communities. These service members deserve to return to the lives they were living without fear of being jobless. The USERRA protections for state active duty will allow these service members to fall under the current USERRA guidelines. The pandemic has brought havoc to veteran employment just as it has disrupted veterans' health care. Because of COVID-19, VA medical facilities had to stop providing veterans with compensation and benefit examinations, a critical component in the granting of VA disabilities benefits. H.R. 7287 will allow the backlog of veterans who need C&P examinations to get appointments more quickly with providers. This will be accomplished by allowing physician assistants, nurse practitioners, audiologists, and psychologists to perform exams across state lines. In mid-June, the backlog for C&P exams was more than 125,000 cases. Our veterans need these exams as medical evidence that can be reviewed when their disability claims are adjudicated. They have earned VA disability benefits through the sacrifices they have made for this country. We must rectify the delay of VA medical exams caused by the pandemic. I conclude by thanking Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and this committee for your incredible leadership and for always keeping veterans at the core of your mission. It is my privilege to represent the American Legion before this committee. I look forward to answering any questions you have.
And thank you as well. Now I recognize Mr. Alice for 5 minutes.
Really, thank you for holding this legislative hearing. My name's Kevin Alice. I'm the son of an American Indian woman born and raised on a reservation in northern Wisconsin, the grandson and great-grandson of two great tribal chairmen of my tribe, and I'm a citizen of the Forest County Potawatomi community and currently serve as the Chief Executive Officer, National Congress of American Indians. We were founded in 1944, and NCAI is the oldest, largest, and most influential American Indian organization that serves the broad interests of tribal nations and communities across the country. American Indian and Alaska Natives have a very long history of distinguished service to the United States. Per capita, American Indians serve at a higher rate in the armed forces than any other group of Americans and have served in all the nation's wars since the Revolutionary War. Additionally, Native veterans served in several wars before they were even recognized as U.S. citizens. But despite this esteemed service, Native veterans have a lower personal income, higher unemployment rates, and are more likely to lack health insurance and other veteran benefits. The United States must honor its commitments to Native veterans and especially ensure that their access to VA health care is safe, secure, and adequate. The federal government's responsibility to provide quality health care to American Indian and Alaska Native veterans derives from their service to the country and also from the federal government's treaty and trust obligations to the American Indian people. NCAI is grateful for the committee's consideration of legislation that addresses the well-being of Native veterans, and we're excited to hear that earlier in this testimony, VA has no issue with these bills. In regards to today's legislative hearing, I'd first like to discuss H.R. 2791, the Department of Veterans Affairs Tribal Advisory Committee Act of 2019. In the 2018 VA Administrative Survey of Veteran Enrollees' Health and Use of Health Care, the VHA reported that 45.2% of American Indian and Alaska Native veterans expressed dissatisfaction with the level of VA care received, nearly double the rate for Caucasian veterans. Native veterans, tribal leaders, and the Government Accountability Office expressed the need for the United States Department of Veterans Affairs to better with tribal stakeholders when assessing, developing, and implementing policies affecting Native veterans. H.R. 2791, the Department of Veterans Affairs Tribal Advisory Committee Act of 2019, would support this goal by creating a VA TAC, which would provide vital opportunities for collaboration, communication, and coordination between the department and tribal nations. Specifically, the VA TAC would advise the Secretary on how to improve the programs and services for Native veterans, identify timely issues related to departmental programs, propose solutions to identified issues, provide a forum for discussion, and help facilitate engagement from across Indian country. Building a strong relationship between the VA and tribal nations will increase awareness and understanding across the VA of the unique issues affecting Native veterans and tribal communities. This engagement will ultimately produce faster solutions and better services for the American Indian that has served this country. Accordingly, NCAI supports H.R. 2791, and our membership in 2019 identified creation of a VA TAC as an urgent need for veterans in our resolution 1933, supporting the Department of Veterans Affairs Tribal Advisory Committee Act. Next, I'd like to discuss H.R. 4908, the Native American Veteran Parity and Access to Care Today Act. The United States has recognized a trust and treaty responsibility to provide health care to American Indians as a result of the forced secession of our lands and resources. The United States assumed this responsibility through a series of treaties with tribal nations, exchanging compensation and benefits to tribal resources. The Snyder Act of 1921 legislatively affirmed this fiduciary responsibility and, along with the Indian Health Care Improvement Act, provides further support for the delivery of health care for American Indian natives pursuant to the treaty and trust obligation of the United States government. This fiduciary obligation recognizes that natives prepaid for their health care and ensures access to this care without additional costs. As a result, we do not have copays or deductibles at IHS facilities, tribal health programs, or urban Indian organizations. The VA, however, subjects the American Indian Native veteran to copayments. While IHS is currently the principal federal health care provider for American Indians and Alaska Natives, the federal government's trust and treaty responsibility to provide health care to tribal citizens extends across the executive branch, which of course includes the VA. In fiscal year 2017, approximately 30% of American Indian and Alaska Native veterans were charged co-payments, averaging approximately $281.56 per veteran. This represents a significant barrier to care for our veterans, access to care, and violates the federal trust responsibility. H.R. 4908, the Parity Act, would address this disparate treatment of American Indian and Alaskan veterans by ensuring they are not subject to co-pays when assessing health care through VA. And NCAI strongly supports this bill, which holds the VA's trust and treaty responsibility to the American Indian and Alaska Native veterans. Additionally, NCAI opposes any efforts to have these co-pay costs shifted to IHS.
Mr. Alice, I just want to note that you're about a minute over your time now, and you'll have a chance to address a lot of this in your testimony. Yeah. Thank you. And finally, Ms. Church, recognize you for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Church, and I am the Executive Director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. Our organization works to create belonging and advance equity and justice for the minority veteran community. Thank you for allowing me to contribute to the work you are doing and to address critical issues raised in these bills. As the Executive Director of MVA, my position affords me the privilege and honor of representing millions of veterans, including veterans of color, women, LGBTQ, and religious and non-religious minorities, and directly serving over 1,100 members around the country and world. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today as you consider legislation that has the power to more equitably support the veteran community that we all love and passionately serve. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to join with several members of this committee at a press conference as we called for a congressional investigation into the murder of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen. We are grateful for the support and encourage more members of this committee and Congress to hear Vanessa's family's pleas and join the fight for justice. At this same press conference and in the streets of DC, I had the privilege and honor of joining dozens of women and gender diverse veterans in these calls for justice. These veterans, much like Vanessa Guillen, served our country tirelessly, honorably, and with integrity. They served throughout history, some decades ago and some still serving, and they represent the veteran and military community that I'm proud to be a part of. Under consideration today is H.R. 3010, the Honoring All Veterans Act, which proposes changing the VA's exclusionary motto. By the VA's current motto, none of these powerful women and gender diverse veterans are even worth mentioning. Our community instead is asked to get creative and understand that saying all men really does include everyone. The VA's motto in its current form has excluded millions of women and gender diverse veterans, past and present, and will continue to exclude future generations until it's changed. In watching testimony from VA representatives regarding the motto at yesterday's hearing on sexual assault and harassment, and in reading statements from officials such as Deputy Director Pamela Powers, it is clear that VA representatives are more concerned with lecturing advocates and members of Congress on Lincoln's words in historical context than on adopting an inclusive motto. We have yet to hear an argument about how the motto itself actually includes women and gender diverse veterans. The most troubling part of the argument is that while this might be what Lincoln said in 1865, the VA adopted this motto in 1959 when administrators knew full well that women were and had been serving. We unequivocally support this legislation and recommend that if changing Lincoln's words is the sticking point, that the motto be changed in its entirety. The inhospitable culture that this motto reflects is inextricably linked to the VA's pervasive issues with sexual assault and harassment. We are also supportive of this committee's efforts to address the rapidly emerging efforts that COVID-19 has had on the veteran community. We are supportive of H.R. 4281, the Access to Contraception Expansion for Veterans Act, and the efforts to expand available contraceptive care to provide a full year's supply of medications, as we recognize that undue barriers can lead to life-changing outcomes for women and trans men. Black and Hispanic women are more likely to forego the use of contraception due to lack of funding or access than their white counterparts, and 1/3 of pregnancies in trans men are unintended. Expanding coverage to provide longer supplies of contraceptives empowers veterans to make planned decisions in their reproductive health. We support this legislation and recommend that VA ensure that contraceptives be made available to veterans of all gender identities, without qualifiers or restrictions based on sex assigned at birth. MVA is appreciative of the community's increased attention to the role that intersectionality plays in the veteran community. Effectively supporting our nation's minority veterans begins with the recognition that the heart of the problem is inextricably bound to social and structural forces. And that it will require social and structural change if we are to equitably serve all veterans. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today and look forward to working with you, your office, you and your offices in support of the minority veteran community. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Church. And in place of the chairman, as we await for him to return to the hearing room, which I think is pretty soon, I'm just going to begin by yielding myself 5 minutes for some questions. I want to start off with Ms. Jackson-Kelly and then Ms. Church, if you could both address this question. We have heard disturbing reports of incidents of white supremacy in the ranks of today's active duty military. And obviously, this isn't the first time that that's ever happened or been talked about. So if this is taking place in the military, it's probably taking place in the veteran space as well. And I wanted to ask first Ms. Jackson-Kelly and then Ms. Church, what have you seen, heard, or experienced regarding white supremacy in the veteran community? And Ms. Jackson-Kelly, if you are able to unmute your line and answer that one first. We can't hear you yet, but you may have. There you go.
I'm seeing it. I am also seeing it in the community where there is gross discrimination against the white veterans, and it has been brought to my attention by some of the other veterans that they have gone to the VA hospital and that they have been approached by some of the other veterans as far as their race and everything. And I have not experienced it personally, but I have been told that they're having problems. But there's been an increase in incidents.
Thank you. And Ms. Church, do you have anything to add on that question?
I do. Thank you so much for the question. I recently, in the wake of the death of George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd, there's been a lot of conversation around the topic of Black Lives Matter. There was reports of vandalism on a memorial for veterans, and many people focused on this idea that there was vandalism to this memorial, but what people didn't talk about was the fact that the only thing that was written on the memorial was, do Black vets count? Instead of answering the question that was very justifiably asked in our community, because this is a perpetual issue within the veteran community that bleeds over from the military community, people continued to focus on vandalism. Well, the VA has continued to show that this is a toxic place for minorities. I have not met a member that doesn't have a single story about white supremacy or racism in this community. They don't feel safe. They don't feel safe in the veteran community. They don't feel safe in the VA. I personally was part of a VSO, a traditional VSO, that it was commonplace for somebody to drop a racial slur in my living room while talking about an equal opportunity or talking about a non-discrimination clause. It was more of a fight that we were even talking about including people than it was to just change the way that we talked about people. The veteran community has a really long way to go if it's ever going to address racism, but the first thing that we have to do is actually talk about it. We continue to skirt the conversation and pretend like it's not actually here, but it is. Our community is full of racism and toxic culture for minorities, and every single person that I've met so far has a story.
And we thank you for speaking up on behalf of the people that you have met and the people that you represent. And we're very proud to have you on all these panels that we have, and you've made some great contributions to us in this Congress. So thank you. With that, I would like to recognize the ranking member, Dr. Rowe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a couple of quick questions and then a comment. Starting with the Honoring All Veterans Act by Congresswoman Rice. Ms. Purswell, do you hear complaints about VA's current mission statement, which quotes President Lincoln's use of the male pronoun to describe the veterans and survivors of the VA? Why or why not?
Thank you for your question. I do hear veterans, and we do have veterans that are concerned about the language of the motto. However, we do not currently have a resolution on the establishment of a mission statement for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And as far as the Legion is concerned, the VA is free to use any motto that they wish. It shouldn't be up to us whether or not they should change it. However, the American Legion does acknowledge that diversity in our military and our veterans includes all genders, races, ages, and any other individual attributes.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that, and I don't believe that Mrs. Rice's, Congresswoman Rice's bill is a heavy lift. I think it's pretty easy. Mr. Alice, in addition to exempting Native American veterans from copays, how else can we help them access care and services that they're entitled to in the VA? I think you must be muted.
Could you repeat your question, please?
You want to repeat the question?
Yep.
Repeat, yeah, sure. In addition to exempting Native American veterans from copays, how else can we help them access the care and services that they're entitled to by the VA?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Ranking Member Rowe, and there's a lot of aspects to that. We could probably talk about that for about an hour. It's access to these facilities, being located in an area or within a distance that is reasonable. That's a funding issue that we really need to look at, I think that that's probably one of the biggest challenges that in Indian country and the reservation community environment that becomes an issue that impedes their delivery of services of healthcare.
Well, the reason we ask, and you can stay up if you would, is because that they serve in really high numbers compared to other groups, and we certainly need to make sure that those servicemen and women get the services that they've earned as military veterans.
And Ranking Member, and so to the extent that's the really kind of the value of a VA TAC would serve, being able to consult with tribes, being able to engage with tribal nations, being able to engage with stakeholders that know where all the hurdles and challenges are in Indian country as they connect to the delivery of healthcare services would be really helpful. We've seen that over in HHS with the TTAG and the STAC committee on how they can navigate these issues by use of that advisory committee, and that would go a long way in addressing some of these things that you are pointing out.
Thank you. And the question to anyone here is, on the panel is willing to take this one up. With an estimated almost 800,000 veterans unemployed last month, do you believe that it would be helpful to grow the economy if we were able to expand the number of veterans who are trained for in-demand occupations and do it quickly? And anyone can unmute and take that one. Okay, we won't unmute and take that one. I love WebEx. I do, yeah, I really enjoy WebEx. And I guess the other question, if anyone wants to take this one, I'll do it very quickly as my time's about gone. Explain why the MVA believes VA should reinstate the public-facing disability benefits question, the DBQ, on its website as required by Representative Barr's draft bill. I just don't see that this is a problem. You have it, you fill this form out, you do it appropriately, you do it exactly right at the time you're supposed to, then the VA changes, and then it's no longer acceptable. That seems, it seems the ultimate catch-22 to me. Any comments? Okay. That's worked out really well. I want to say I love WebEx. With
I'm
that,
so sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I will yield
have a
back.
comment for that. Okay.
Proceed, go ahead. There was somebody who was going to respond
Thank
to
you.
that.
I just wanted to say that even though the American Legion doesn't have any legislation that specifically speaks to DBQs, we do have department service officers all around the country that do have access to that form, the updated form, and they are able and willing to help any service member, regardless if they are members of the American Legion or not. So that's just a resource out there for them.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Dr. Rowe yields back. Before I begin my questions for the second panel, I'd like to take a minute to make an observation and a follow-up with a request. I am committed to getting diverse voices and views before this committee. However, I was struck while reviewing the testimony that some organizations we invited to submit views told us that they could not formally comment on a number of the bills on the agenda that seek to enhance inclusivity at VA because the organization lacked a resolution on the specific topic. One of the first hearings I held as chairman of this committee was entitled VA 2030, A Vision for the Future of VA. Given the changing demographics of the veteran population, we all need to do more to better serve minority groups, including women, the LGBTQ community, and people of color. Gone are the days when veterans advocacy space should be dominated by the wants and needs of white male veterans. Therefore, as many of our stakeholders begin to gather for their annual conventions, I urge you and your members to consider resolutions related to greater inclusivity at VA. Now, my first question is for Ms. Jackson-Kelly and Ms. Church. As you know, in order to craft meaningful policy, we must ensure that all veteran voices, all minority, that all voices are included. How have the voices of minority veterans been actively excluded in the past, and what measures must be implemented to ensure that lawmakers and agencies reach veterans who have been historically underserved? So, Ms. Jackson-Kelly, you might want to go first, and then Ms. Church. Ms. Jackson-Kelly, are you there? There you are.
Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. I think one of the things that has been helpful for us currently is your reaching out to us as a group to meet and discuss the issues that we are facing and how Congress can help us resolve these issues. The community on a whole there's been a lot of old ideas and people are reluctant to try to integrate new ideas. So as a result of that, the old leadership is really struggling to remain in their leadership, and they're not willing to listen to what we have to say a lot of times. So we have to kind of force our way in. But I thank you for allowing us to have a seat at the table and to meet as a group to discuss the different issues that we are facing as minority veterans.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson-Kelly. Ms. Church, do you have a response to my question?
I do. Thank you, Chairman. So you asked for examples of how the VA has been exclusionary in the past, and one of them is up for debate today, including the motto. The motto very clearly says that this is an organization that is meant for men, that women can come in if we are allowed. We're no longer asking to be allowed. We're asking to be explicitly included. Another example is another legislation. It's 2020, and we're still talking about whether or not LGBTQ folks are even represented on VA advisory committees. It's 2020. Like we've had marriage equality for years. We've had inclusion of our Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been a defunct policy for years. You also see it in the ways that VA has expanded telehealth. We had a hearing and we talked extensively about the disparities that exist for Indigenous and tribal communities. VA telehealth doesn't include technology vouchers for the folks that need it most. There's incredible disparities when it comes to Wi-Fi and broadband access. All of this is baked into the system. If VA is going to do anything to make the system better, they have to create trust with the communities that they're trying to serve. I continue to say that programming to the margins with nuance and looking at programs and policies with intention will serve all of our veterans better. It's not just for minority veterans. When you can look at nuance and you can create policy that has nuance, you're more likely to serve all of us better. And so for me, for us, it's all about creating that trust and building programs that are looking at what are the unique needs of minority veterans. If you can serve those, you can serve everyone better.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. When we speak of VA benefits, that also includes how we lay our veterans to rest. We want to ensure that there's parity for all who served and have earned the right to be buried at a VA cemetery if the veteran chooses that. Ms. Church, is there more that VA could do to achieve burial benefit parity for minority veterans of the reserve components of our armed forces and the National Guard and their spouses?
So this isn't exactly our area of expertise, but I will say that excluding anyone from the Guard that has served their country honorably is exclusionary and doesn't make any sense. The National Guard is a part of our activated services on a regular basis. Why are we even having a conversation about whether or not they deserve the same benefits and rights that we as veterans have? In addition, you can probably remove some mottos from plaques at VA facilities. You can remove Nazi symbols on VA gravestones. There's a lot of work that you can do in memorial and benefits to make these cemeteries and make these facilities more inclusive of the veterans that we seek to serve.
Thank you. Ms. Jackson-Kelly, is VA doing enough to achieve burial benefit parity for Black women serving as members of reserve components of our armed forces and the National Guard and for their spouses?
I fully agree that they should be doing it. And having spent 15 years in the reserve, and the smaller part of my military time on active duty, I definitely support this idea because I know as a reservist a long time, we're not given the recognition that we should receive because we were known as only working 2 weeks out of the year. But what people do not realize, we were working in between in the community as well. So I think that they should definitely receive the same recognition as the regular Army or the other Air Forces or whatever branch of service.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson-Kelly. Appreciate your being here and being available to us. Do we have any other members at the? Yes. Mr. Bost, is he here? Oh, there you are, Mr. Bost. You suddenly. Mr. Bost, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was so close, you just didn't realize how close I was. You know, the 6 foot distancing, it was still 6 foot, but right at it. Ms. Purswell, can you please explain maybe the expanded license portability to certain non-physician healthcare professionals would help rural veterans receive more timely and quality disability exams? Can you expand on that?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. Some of our veterans, especially those that are newly entering into civilian life, are in need of their disability ratings and compensation benefits in order to obtain their health care. Their education benefits, their employment training, and aid in attendance, among other benefits. Without being able to complete their CMP examinations, these benefits cannot be obtained, and our veterans are going without jobs and without health care or assistance that is needed to sustain basic quality of life. Additional rural veterans, like I was not too long ago, are particularly affected by a lack of access to the CMP exams, which has been compounded by the more than 125,000 backlog cases I mentioned earlier. Infrastructure in those rural areas is really what is lacking in those rural areas for veterans to get care.
And on that same line, do you feel like by passing this bill that though not only in rural areas but all around, that will reduce the overall disability claims? and backlogs of those claims?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question,
Yeah,
sir?
in your organization's experience, if we pass 7287, would it help reduce those disability claims and backlogs?
Absolutely, sir, it would. By being able to have those physician assistants, nurse practitioners, audiologists, and psychiatrists being able to take those cases across state lines, it's going to make a huge difference. It would have made a huge difference for me in my mental health assessment that I needed when I first got out.
Yes, it is our hope that we get this bill passed along with several of the others and across the finish line, because reducing that backlog and giving the opportunity for quick access to all of these professions in today's world where telemedicine is so readily available, we're hoping that that's going to pass. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bost. I am going to go for just another round of questions I'd like to get asking, and if you would like to join me in asking for the questions. So I'd like to ask about the Service Member Civil Relief Act. We all agree that when an American signs up to become a member of our country's armed forces, that they are committing to put our country and its needs above their own. And I think that I can speak for the committee when I say that the sacrifice and the hardships endured by our country's veterans should never be forgotten. And one unexpected hardship that many service members may face comes from being locked in leases and contracts that they no longer use because the military relocated the service member. The Service Member Civil Relief Act was enacted to help alleviate this situation, but many service members are slipping through the cracks because of the common practice of using arbitration clauses in contracts. This is for Ms. Purswell. Can you tell us if there is any member of your organization that has experienced issues with being forced into arbitration over a contract dispute, or how that affected that service member? Ms. Purswell?
Any knowledge of any cases of that? I'm sure that they are out there, although I am not aware of them personally.
Okay. Can you speak to how the Justice for Service Members Act can ease the burdens of service members?
I think most importantly, it's showing that forced arbitration is violating the 7th Amendment, and that we have to hold employers accountable for ensuring that these service members can come back to the jobs that they're leaving when they go to serve their country.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I want to move on to one more question regarding home loans. And Ms. Jackson-Kelly, I've heard that multiple anecdotes regarding how World War II African-American veterans were denied access to federal benefits that they earned through their service. For example, African-American veterans were not permitted to buy houses in certain locations, and they were denied entry into many predominantly white institutions of higher learning, even if they were overqualified candidates. Ms. Jackson-Kelly, can you briefly speak about any experiences where members of the NABMW either experienced a denial of access to federal benefits, or were hindered in accessing those benefits in some way? Okay, all right, thanks. Ms. Jackson-Kelly?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have two ladies within our organization who had applied for home loans, and they were well qualified as far as the financial aspects of it, and they were denied. And then they pursued it, and they got accepted. So it's something that you should not have to do. You know, you should not have to fight for what's rightfully yours just because of the color of your skin. And also, one of the problems that a couple of the women were having was having their children taken away from them after they've served in the service. And the problem is there's no identity that there's a veteran when you go to court. So they feel that the status as a veteran is identified, that they will be able to dialogue with the people involved.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that I want to thank the ranking member, and thanks to all our guests for appearing in front of the committee today. This legislative hearing has been very informative and will guide our work to improve and pass into law many of the bills that we have discussed today. All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. Again, thank you for appearing before us today, and this hearing is now adjourned.